Good morning. It's 9 o'clock and time for the Tuesday, June 14th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County. We'll start with an invocation followed by the pledge, but today, thinking about the deceased in Orlando, we'll begin with a moment of silence. Please rise.
Lord God, in this time we get a glimpse of evil's face. And so we lift up to you all the families and loved ones affected by the shooting, the murder over the weekend. We're also mindful of your word, Matthew chapter 5. Will you tell us, we've heard we should not murder, but each has to look into his own heart, where we see anger, we see other forms of murder. So we bring to you this morning what we see on the outside and what we see on the inside. And only you can reconcile that. And we ask you to do that. We thank you, you've provided a way. We ask that the decisions that we make and the things that we do would bring about life. We ask that for what's before us today, each and every one of us. We ask that for this board this morning in the decisions that they make and what they do after this meeting. And we are just so grateful to you for giving us life. We ask that we would use it as you give it. And we bring this before you in your name. Amen.
Amen. Today is Flag Day. Please join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Flesher, and thank you very much, Mr. Bowling, for a very nice prayer today.
Thank you.
We will move to additions and deletions to the agenda. I believe there's been a request for addition of one proclamation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And that deals with Amateur Radio Week. Are there any other additions or deletions?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
We've got a motion to approve from Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Davis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Commissioner Davis, if you would read the proclamation designating June 20th through June 26th as Amateur Radio Week.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And here to receive this is Eric Larabelle, the club president, and several other club members. Gentlemen, if you'd like to come on forward. And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Podium there. There we go. That's good.
We're going to read it first, and then we'll come up and get a picture. All right? Y'all can stand there because you want to... Here we go. This is a proclamation designating June 20th through 6th, 2016 as Amateur Radio Week. Whereas Indian River County has more than 500 licensed amateur radio operators who have demonstrated their value in public assistance by providing emergency radio communications. And whereas these amateur radio operators donate their services free of charge in the interest of the citizens of the county, as well as the world. And whereas these amateur radio operators are on alert for any emergency, local or worldwide, and are a part of the Homeland Defense and regularly practice their communication skills. And whereas these radio amateurs share their skills by teaching others, demonstrating their unique communication skills to the public during Amateur Radio Week. And whereas members of the Vero Beach Amateur Radio Club will be participating in the emergency preparedness exercise known as Field Day on June 25th and 26th, 2016. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County that June 20th through the 26th, 2016 be designated as Amateur Radio Week in Indian River County, and the Board encourages all citizens to pay appropriate tribute to the amateur radio operators of our county, adopted this 14th day of June, 2016, signed by all 5 county commissioners. Gentlemen, it was appropriate that we put this on as an emergency item to begin with. And for you to be able to, I attended your event last year. It was at the Wabasso Causeway. Is it going to be there again this year?
Yes, sir.
Okay, super. I'll do my level best to swing by. We've got a golf tournament. Is that this weekend? Or is that
Yes.
next week?
This weekend.
So we'll be up and about, going from place to place, and certainly looking forward to seeing you there. We'd like to hear a little bit more about it, though. If you'd like to elaborate on the event this weekend and just tell us a little bit more about you and your organization. One at a time.
Don't fight over it. Start setting up on Friday.
Sir, if you get to the podium and use the mic, thanks. That way we can get it in the minutes.
We're going to start setting up on Friday. The actual event on air is 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon to 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. We'll be operating all frequencies, all modes. Some of the gentlemen will be doing Morse code, which is still quite popular among amateurs. There'll be solar-powered stations there, battery. The goal is to get off of commercial power for 24 hours. And you're all welcome to stop by.
Just to elaborate on that, it was really interesting for those of you that hadn't had a chance to stop by. They're running off a generator or battery, basically just like you just said.
Yep.
But it's not just to be able to get off of the electric source. It's also what can you do while you're off the electric source. And then you start reaching out through different channels. And correct me if I'm going down the wrong road here.
You're doing
but
great.
They reach out to different channels to talk to amateur operators throughout the world, mainly, of course, in North America. But sometimes you hit some skip and you get up into Canada and other areas, and it was really interesting just to hear them to be able to fine-tune something as a backup source and be able to talk to people not affected by an emergency or a disaster so far away whenever there's absolutely no other forms of communication, of which we really can't imagine unless you had the opportunity to go through Hurricane Andrew, where there was not only any communications, there were no houses, nor were there even street signs. And so let's, God, hope we never go through that again. But the services that y'all provide in the event that we do have to face that it really brings you back to appreciating the days of the pigeons if you have to communicate that way. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
How about we get somebody else to take that picture so you can be in it?
Good luck with everything. Thank you.
I don't forget the hurricane. Thank you.
Come to the left a
Guys,
little bit.
turn around.
You guys want to slide back? Took the exam. Okay.
We'll now move to the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May
Second.
10th.
Motion to approve.
I'm going to take the motion from Commissioner Zork with a second from Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much. We will now move on to the consent agenda. Gentlemen, anybody wish to pull anything from the consent agenda? I will ask if there's anybody in the audience who'd like to pull anything from the consent agenda for discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
move approval.
Motion to approve from Commissioner Fleischer, a second from Commissioner Zork. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. We will now move to public notice items, and I will ask Mr. Reingold if you would read the ones under item C.
Thank you very much to the chair. The board, the audience, and those watching at home, we have two public notice items today to read. The first is a notice of a scheduled public workshop, which will be June 27, 2016 at 6 p.m. The Indian River County Board of County Commissioners will hold a public workshop regarding Fellsmere Road maintenance on Monday, June 27, 2016 at 6 p.m. at the Clarence F. Corker Center for the Performing Arts, the old Fellsmere School Auditorium, Community Room 22, South Orange Street, Fellsmere, Florida. And again, this will be June 27th at 6 p.m. Additionally, notice of a scheduled public hearing. This will be an item for June 21st, 2016. This will involve the county-initiated request to amend the county's land development regulations, establishing requirements for a county vacation rental license and other vacation rental regulations by creating zoning code section 911.15 subsection 9. This will be legislative in nature, and again, that'll be a public hearing scheduled for June 21st, 2016. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reingold. We will now move to Office of Management and Budget, Health Insurance, and I believe Mr. Brown is going to lead us in that discussion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jason Brown, County Budget Director. On February 9th, 2016, staff presented several options to address
Jason, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before we go into too much background on this, I have received some correspondence that I'd like to share the gist of the correspondence with, and then get the pleasure of the board to make sure that it's
I
the
think I
direction.
know, I have
And,
an
yeah.
idea of what it might, that's fine. I'll let Commissioner Davis go ahead.
I've received some correspondence from several parties that are involved in this process, specifically the IAFF, as well as some members of the Sheriff's Department. And there's some kind of event somewhere in Jacksonville or something right now where the leadership of the IAFF is. And so they've asked for not necessarily a postpone of today as much as to ensure that they have some input or opportunity for some input on this whenever they don't have a conflict, which specifically would be probably the next meeting. And so at my meeting with Jason Brown yesterday, going over the agenda, I suggested perhaps what we should do is go ahead and cover it today. Anybody that wants to talk about it today, we have the dialogue back and forth, but continue it again next week and have basically, I'm going to say, a duplication of the exact same thing, just for those parties involved, because there's no rush on this, in my opinion. And more importantly, there's no need to make this look anything other than above board and transparent.
Commissioner Davis, practically brilliant, almost duplicated the conversation I had with Jason Brown also yesterday. So I think that it's a very good path forward. And I believe the elements of it are complicated enough and of interest enough to both all our employees and the public that would be very fine to do it once this week and once next week. So just prepare for the right moment, for whether it's tabled or whatever it is. I'm never quite clear on that one. So
I will
we'll look
help
forward
you.
to your leadership
Thank you, sir.
at the appropriate time. Thank you very much.
And I've had the similar conversation with Jason as well, and Jason did agree that he would reach out to all of the collective bargaining units to ensure that there was a conversation regarding today's meeting, and in addition that they would be able to be present in some capacity in the following meeting if there is such a motion a little later on.
Very good. Thank
But
you.
I appreciate that commitment, Jason.
Thank you for bearing with us, Mr. Brown.
No problem, and staff completely agrees with that. We want to make a presentation, get some of the items out there, but can defer a decision till next week. I do want to make everyone certain that the conflict was unintentional. We didn't know that that there was a conflict there, and I believe that the fire union should have their chance to have a voice heard, so we can do that next week. I will say we're trying to put the budget together, so there's some urgency in getting some determination at that point. And we did receive another email late yesterday requesting to delay the process. It seems further, but we did talk to our labor attorney, and we are able to move forward with this and continue to allow the ability to let the union negotiate for what they're looking at, which is possibly going out on their own for health insurance. There still is the ability to negotiate through that process. So with that said, we can get into the presentation today. I have with me Sheila O'Sullivan and Ann Rankin from HR, also Christian Bergstrom from our broker, and Mike Smikowski from the Office of Management and Budget. If we could move into the presentation, just to continue on February 9th, we made some preliminary alternatives available for addressing the recent shortfalls in the county's health insurance fund. At that meeting, the board directed staff to bring back recommendations. So this is that effort. A little bit of background on our health insurance plan. We provide coverage to about 1,300 employees. That includes county Board of County Commissioner employees and the 5 constitutional officers employees, and then about 250 retirees. When you add all their dependents, spouses, and children, you get to about 3,600 total members.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask questions, or how would you like to?
I'm fine with asking questions
Okay.
during it because I think we'll possibly forget them along the way.
Thank you.
To the
You know me well.
Yes.
On the retirees, do we have an attrition rate? Because you're talking about the OPEB, that we no longer pay for the retirement or the health insurance benefits anymore. And so, just to say this as politely as possible, there's got to be a rate at which that number declines by annually.
Yes, that's all in the actuarial tables. What we do have is that number is going down because any employees hired after 2006, when we saw this coming about 10 years ago, we knew that this was a big liability out there. So we made the change that for any new employees, that explicit subsidy went away. So that number should be going down. We do have what's called the implicit subsidy, which we're stuck with based on Florida statutes, which is essentially that we have to offer retirees health insurance at the same rate as our regular employees, and an older population typically has higher costs, so that's all built into the calculation too. So there will continue to be a much smaller number, but that explicit subsidy, we have made that change, and that is going away over time as the employees, and so anyone hired in the last 10 years doesn't get the subsidy.
I would like, just for my own knowledge, I'd like to know what that attrition rate is according to the actuary tables.
I don't think it'd be dropping yet. Because guys retiring today with 30 years were hired before '06, so we're still covering them. So we really won't see it significantly changing
Till 36.
till 2036. But guy that retires today, he's covered.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes,
Sense.
so it does take time for people to work through that. One of the other things
So it could be
is,
going up.
a lot of the subsidy goes away when someone becomes Medicare eligible. So that does feed into it a little bit more. So when someone hits 65, the subsidy goes away now for everybody who retired since, I want to say, 2009. So that is working a little bit faster based on the 65. So we don't have as many folks that stay on until they're 85 because it makes more sense to them to just go on Medicare in most cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the plan is self-insured. We are still grandfathered under the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. One of the reasons for that, we haven't made any plan changes since 2010. That has a dual purpose. One is because if you start making significant plan changes, you lose that grandfathered status, and you've got to cover other things that are required under Obamacare that we don't have to fund, which is estimated to be about a 3% hit these days. It's a PPO provider network administered by Florida Blue. We have seen, like the rest of the country, some increases over the last few years. After Obamacare, those have gone up. We've got additional costs. Medical trends up 9% last year. We're starting to experience that. As far as specifically Obamacare costs, we have certain fees that have to be paid into Obamacare that are about $250,000 a year. So those are explicit Obamacare costs. I would say there's another impact of raising increased prices, which is harder to quantify, but we know it's there and we know it's something. So if you look at the trend line over the last several years, you can see from 2009 through about 2012, we were kind of flat. Some of that was we were reducing our employment level, but we were also having some good experience. Some of those changes from Obamacare have kicked in, and just medical inflation on top of that, and our costs have been going up.
So, Jason, if I may, the first bar in 2009, that's when we had roughly 960 employees, but the bar in 2015 is what's about 730 employees?
About 750 employees now.
So, I mean, on a per capita basis, that bar goes a lot higher, a lot faster.
And we are experiencing those increases. So what has that done to our health insurance fund? A few years ago, we were operating at a surplus, but you can see that that we haven't made those changes. I need to get back to the second reason that we didn't make plan changes. Our employees went several years without raises. We didn't want to load them on with more premiums, higher copays, higher deductibles, all that stuff. So that was another reason for not making changes. But we can see here the result of that. with those increasing costs, if you go up 9% a year, that's a $1.6 million additional hit every year on our plan. So what's happened is it's turned negative quickly. We lost about $1.5 million in 2014. Last year it was $2.8 million. So that's why we're recommending making adjustments now, because if we don't move now, the measures that we need to take in the future become more drastic.
Commissioner Swart?
One question for when we redo portion of this presentation next week. If you can back up one slide. Chairman Sly brought up a good point that if we could, if it's not too much trouble, under each of these years, put the number of people covered.
Okay.
It puts it in perspective that we're actually paying more for less people, and to kind of quantify that in a better way for the public to understand that it's gone up even though we have significantly fewer
A simple
people.
way, if it's possible, is to just take the math, do the math, and do a second chart with the cost per capita.
Per capita.
Yeah, did 18 million divided by 730, you said?
Well, the number will change with each year.
Right, I'm just doing 15.
Okay.
Right, we can add that and bring that back for next week. So you can see here on the next slide, our premiums have been pretty close to the same for several years. We have avoided any increase in the employee premium since 2007, 2008, in light of the fact of those folks not receiving raises. However, we did reinstitute raises over the last couple of years, so we think now there is an appropriate time to make an adjustment there going down the road. Next, this chart just shows our total premium. This includes the employee portion and the employer portion, so it's kind of the total cost of health insurance. So for family coverage, our current cost is $963 a month, split between the employer and the employee. You can see here we've surveyed our surrounding areas, all the surrounding counties, local municipalities, and the school board, and almost everyone is above us. And the average amongst those is $1,608. And you can see there in some of these counties, the employer's paying in excess of $20,000 a year, which is just kind of a crippling expense to have to fund that benefit. So we're in much better shape than most of those around us, and we think that's attributable to several things: some good plan design, some good wellness activities that we've done already, and good some good fortune and good health for our population.
Mr.
Next.
Commissioner Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I talked to Jason about this, one of the things that I think we should look at going forward is you'll notice some of these other entities have multiple plans. Brevard County has 3, the school board has 3, and basically it's different levels of coverage, and so you can offer a lower employee cost but a lower coverage package. And just the idea was, going forward, would that be something we might want to look at, having a second plan, maybe not as full coverage as what we have, but maybe more affordable for some employees. So just to keep that in the discussion as we go forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Davis?
to look at this from 1,000 feet up, we'd also need to ask ourselves, under the Obamacare changes, is that a significant change? And then would that significant change cause us to bear the additional costs by doing so? So the juice might not be worth the squeeze in that instance, but it is something that we ought to look at.
And I don't know if any of the other proposed changes might impact our grandfathered status either.
And we really need to know that before we start doing anything.
Yep. So skipping ahead here a little bit, but the plan changes that we're recommending for next fiscal year are not significant enough to trigger that Obamacare number, so we would maintain our grandfathered status with the recommended changes. If we went to a 2-tiered plan, we would offer a less rich plan at a lower premium. That plan would not be grandfathered, but our existing plan could remain grandfathered.
And not that I do not trust the federal government, but how
You couldn't even say it.
Get it out.
how did we quantify that, get it in writing, that this is I mean, what is the threshold of a significant change?
So Christian can probably talk in much more detail. I think you have to exceed a 5% adjustment to trigger that, so that $30 premium increase is the most significant change impacting the employee. That's below the 5% threshold. If we had said, oh, the employee's going to pay $100 more, grandfathered status is gone.
So that's based on a dollar amount, a change of the premium, or cost? Or?
It's actually based on the cost share. It's the percentage of cost share, and since the cost share between the employee and the employer is not shifting more than 5%, you're able to maintain the grandfather
And I'm
status.
assuming that's not on an annual basis, that's probably on a cumulative basis since 2010?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Davis, you must think Obamacare is managed by the FEMA people.
Yeah, exactly, because it keeps moving targets, exactly.
Another question, Mr. Chairman.
It always helps to get things in writing when dealing with the federal government.
Even that doesn't help.
Yeah, there's no guarantee.
Jason, under the school board numbers under here, aren't those their old numbers that are going up significantly? And do we know what those are going forward to make the chart as current
Right.
or as relative as possible, since those numbers are changing?
So those are their current numbers as they are for ours and the other local governments. In discussions with the school board staff and hearing what they're facing, they're self-insured like us, and their fund is facing a substantial shortfall. They had made a presentation. I spoke to Fritz over there at the school board office, and in order to address their shortfall, they were recommending premium changes of over 50% increase. I think that was for planning purposes. That's if nothing else has changed. So I'm not saying that their premium's going up 50%, but they were saying if nothing else was done, their premiums would have to go up by 50%. So their numbers, which are one of the lower ones down there with us, but we know that they're woefully inadequate based on their current expense. And I do want to point out that one of the reasons we're here, we want to make changes before we get to a point where we don't really have many options. So I think it's important to know that while our health plan is still in pretty good financial shape, if we continue down this road, it won't be before long. So it's important to make changes soon.
And Mr. Chairman, as the school board does it would be interesting to see what their changes are going to cost them, because it's more than the 5% versus what it's going to save them. And
They're not grandfathered, are they?
I have no idea. I'd be good to keep up with this.
I'm not certain of that. I know they won't be once they make, they're going to have to make some significant changes.
Okay, thank you.
So here's the same info on the single premium. Once again, we're below the average on that. So just to add to the point there, we lost about $2.8 million last year. So while our fund is still in decent financial shape, if we keep losing $3 million a year, it won't be. So this year we increased the employer side by about $30, which brought us $500,000. So if no change in expenses, we'd have about a $2.3 million loss for this year. But that medical inflation, long range, it's going to hit in 9% a year is about $1.6 million. So for next fiscal year, we're thinking something in excess of $3.5 million up to $3.9 million may be needed. So that's a big piece to bite off. We've broken this into a 2-year plan, trying to avoid as much impact on the employees per board direction from February. In this first year, we've got a plan that kind of addresses about $2.8 million of that, and we'll get into those in just a minute, and that will cut the loss and then make recommendations for future changes for 2017-18 for the following year. So to get into it, the first proposed change is we're currently in a Blue Choice plan from Florida Blue, and that we are one of the few in a Blue Choice. All of the surrounding areas that are in Blue Cross are on a Blue Options plan. So what's happened is the Blue Choice is a little less fresh. It doesn't have as good a cost containment measures, and it's just a little bit stale. Now this change, I want to emphasize, there's no change in copays, no change in deductibles, no change in out-of-pocket maximums. This is largely back office stuff where the doctor's offices are dealing with the insurance companies. The broker in Florida Blue estimate a savings of about 2% by making this change, which is a little over $300,000 a year savings. Next,
Jason,
yes.
if I may ask, is there any downside to that? I mean,
So there is a slight network disruption. We had Florida Blue do a network disruption analysis. There are 3 providers that will fall off the plan that were used by a total of 5 out of our 3,600 members last year. I think most of them are out of area. I think one was a doctor and the other were some kind of supply provider. On the other side, we will pick up 8 new providers that are on the new network. So there's a very minor disruption. I don't think the doctor was local. I think it was out of area doctor was the one that fell off. And so that would be the only significant impact there.
Okay, so
but it's very minor, very minor.
Disruption for a reasonable cost savings.
Correct.
Where healthcare reimbursement's going is pretty interesting. Just for example, on your joint replacements, they're starting with what they call a CJR, which is a complete joint replacement or comprehensive joint replacement. That's it. And it's where the insurance companies are going to the medical providers and say, we're going to give you this much money to take care of this knee. And that is including everything from the inception all the way to the physical therapy at the end to where you're out the door. Now, is Blue Cross doing something like that with our employees, or is that something that we would have to initiate because we're self-insured to start doing with a medical facility? Can anybody answer that?
They are beginning to do those type of payments on a global basis.
Who is they?
Florida Blue.
Okay.
Through their networks. As provider contracts renew, they are changing from a fee-for-service payment method to more of a bundled payment method. And it's really based off of how Medicare is now reimbursing facilities and providers. The fee-for-service, the way traditional healthcare has been paid over the last 20 years is the more a provider does, the more they get paid. And it did not focus on quality and outcome. So now we're going more towards a quality and outcomes-based payment methodology.
And there's another one too. But instead of it being just like on a group, it's like basically you just get a group of people that are in a particular category, and they give you some money. And if you are very successful, you're financially rewarded. If you're not very successful, you're financially penalized. And so I just don't know how that's going to come into effect of what we've got to pay, and how we can even start to wrap our minds around the future cost of as fast as medicine's changing at the provider level.
And I think these things are emerging. We'll continue to look at that and a lot of those types of things for next year. And that's why it's important to stay vigilant. Things are changing so quickly, and we need to continuously monitor the plan and make changes like that to implement any of those cost saving.
Commissioner
When we met back in February, I asked the question, looking at around the state, and I think it was you were representative from the company. I said, who has the best county plan to look at? And I think Martin County was mentioned as having one of the best structures of cost management plans and things. If that's still the case, and looking around the state, just as a benchmark to know what somebody's plan that's really working well and what it has in it is, where possible, any references to Martin County numbers. If that's really something that's got a great plan and it's running well and it's cost effective, just again to balance out, this is where we're at, but somehow Martin County got to a potentially better number, or maybe it's the same number but better services to the employees. If something to measure against. I see we've got St. Lucie and Brevard, which is good, but since if Martin really has something that's functioning very well and is cost effective, that would be a good relative benchmark to go against a very successful plan. Not saying ours is not successful, but if they're ranked that well. Thank you.
And I will say Martin County's got a good plan. They are there on the comparator, but if you look at their total cost, they're significantly higher than ours.
Right.
They may have a more generous benefit, but sometimes we don't do a good enough job of saying that we're doing a good job. I think the folks in HR have done a great job with all the wellness initiatives and some of the things that we've done, and working with the broker and managing the plan. We can definitely learn from others, and we want to do that. But do want to say that if you look at that chart comparing us to all the other surrounding areas, from a cost basis, we're a lot better than most of them. The only ones down there with us below that red line essentially are the school board, which we know their premiums are woefully inadequate. And then you've got Fellsmere's down there, but they've got a high deductible plan, so I would expect their costs to be lower. In getting to apples, it's always hard to do in the healthcare business, but I think we're performing well from a financial standpoint. It's just that adjustments are needed, just like everybody else. We're facing these increases. You're basically fighting that 9% inflation. If you can bend the inflation curve, you're doing good. If instead of going up 9%, you can bend it and go up 4%, that's kind of a win. It doesn't necessarily look like a win, but it's far better than going up 9%. The next change we're looking at is a diabetes management program. There are over 29 million Americans with diabetes. 1 out of 4 over 65 has diabetes, and even a larger portion are pre-diabetic. So this is a significant health care issue and cost issue resultantly. So last year, our plan costs for diabetes management were a little over $1 million. What the Connect Diabetes Management Plan is, it's a comprehensive plan. They provide all the diabetic supplies. We receive a savings on the supply costs and the medications. And what happens is they also provide health coaching, real-time monitoring. They've got apps for your phone. You can help monitor diabetes, and you can really have improved outcomes if the diabetes is managed better. So not only it provides an estimated 10% savings, which we estimate to be a little over $100,000 a year, provides a higher standard of care, which is good for our employees, helps them stay healthier. They're more productive employees. They have better quality of life. So we think this is a win-win for the county. Saves a little bit of money for the county, and improved level of care for the employees.
How did we find out about this?
The broker brought this to our attention, and they are unique in this arena. So,
okay, are you going to FAC?
Yes.
Okay. I would highly encourage you to spend a lot of time inside the exhibition hall. There's a lot of providers of different types of money-saving ideas. And the reason why I say that is there very well may be some providers that could save us money that may not be as advantageous to our broker, just by the way the services are structured. And so I would highly encourage you to walk through, and anybody that's talking about saving money on any kind of healthcare issues, that you spend quite a bit of time and try to pick their brain and maybe even set up some face-to-face time here with them.
Okay.
That's just me as one person, but I think I've learned a lot by walking the halls of the convention, and it's there's a lot to be learned there, stuff that I never knew.
I'm always looking for cost-saving opportunities, and we'll definitely do that. The next item is international prescription provider services. So I think we're all familiar with the story of people driving up to Canada to get their prescription medications for less money. This is kind of a tag on to that. What you have are these providers that are out there that can provide employees directly with prescription medicines. We've talked to a provider. They provide medications from Tier 1 countries only. So you're talking about Canada, United Kingdom, France, Australia, countries like that. We're not going to get third world medications. It's top tier 1 countries that have regulations similar to FDA as far as ensuring a safe medication, and they provide that to the employees with no copay. So if that medication had a $30 copay, the employee pays nothing, and then they charge the county, but what they're charging the county is less than the county would pay if that prescription was filled at a retail pharmacy. So once again, we think this is a win-win. The employees have the option of doing this. No one has to participate, so it's a voluntary program. So if someone says, no, I want my medication, I want to go down to CVS and get my medication, or go down to my favorite local pharmacist and get my medication, they can continue to do that. This is just a cost-saving option. based on numbers we got from one of the providers, if we assumed a 25% participation rate, it'd save the county about $100,000 and save the employees $25,000 in copay.
Jason,
After you.
does that include anything for the education of the employees? Because this is the type of thing, like for pensions, whether you have to opt in or opt out, if there isn't something, a clear education program, especially in the first year, would expect to have a low participation rate.
In this program, as many employee education outreach is very important. So it would need to be led in with a good outreach program. Usually the providers will help in doing that, and HR works with those folks and can schedule meetings and inform the employees on how the system would work.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Davis.
And my question would also on this would be, with the amount of prescriptions that go through our jail that the sheriff's the department's responsible for, is there any opportunity here for them also?
We can look at that if there's a potential.
But I mean, offhand, just without knowing much about it, I think that you're talking about a different type of person. The people who go in the jail, there's a higher rotation versus county employees. So for myself, I take Flonase and Singulair, say, regularly, but I know I'm taking that for a period of years. And so something like this works very well, I think, for those people who have a regular prescription that they're getting. But the Sheriff's Department, my understanding is, their customer base changes much more rapidly, which I think would lessen the ability to take full advantage of something like this. So, I mean, we'd ask the sheriff to look into it.
If I were the sheriff, what I'd ask myself is, what's my top 5 prescriptions and how many of those can I save, even with the rotating population?
Absolutely. But I don't know if you could, again, this is something I don't know enough about, but I don't know if you can sort of inventory prescriptions versus, but I'm sure the sheriff will be helpful on that as we go forward.
Question, Mr. Chairman. Not so much on the international prescription provider, but in the local prescription providers. Joe had mentioned at one time that there's apparently a significant swing between whether it's Walmart, Publix, CVS, Walgreens, your local type, I don't say mom and pop, but your local based in your county pharmacies. If the employees knew that if you went to XYZ pharmacy, that helps reduce future cost increases. But if you only know that the copay is $10 or whatever it is for an item, you don't know the back end portion that the county picks up to know how to steer our employees to, or not steer, suggest that if you want to help lessen future increases, if you shop at somebody or get your prescription from a more competitive provider.
Well, I think that you just nailed exactly what's wrong with healthcare.
Right.
Is you're not paying directly for the services
Right.
that you get to shop around, and so that's.
You don't care.
That's right.
And yeah, that's a great point. I agree completely with both of you. Everything else, you go to the grocery store, you know what you're paying for, a box of cereal or something. People don't know what they're paying for medical things. Most times not asked, and usually when you find out, it's after the service is provided. So we were actually hoping to bring something, but Florida Blue is still working on a prescription PPO where they would select the pharmacies that would provide the most advantageous price while still offering choice, a good amount of choice to the employees. Because if you go to one retail pharmacy and the county's paying significantly more at that one, you're getting the same medication across the street at the other retail pharmacy. It benefits all of us because we all at the end of the day are impacted by those costs. And that's something that's important to do in employee education also, is show that, hey, we're all in this together, and the more our costs go up, the more we're going to end up sharing with the employees. And it's one of those things it's very invisible. It's hard for the employees to see, but we can talk about people not getting raises for years and years, not just here but across the country. A lot of times people aren't getting raises because their employer's just eating all the extra health insurance costs, and the money that they had for raises, that was eaten up on health insurance costs, and it's just not seen. So anything we can do to improve the transparency and save some dollars on health care just helps all around.
Do they have a targeted date of when they might have information on that for us?
Yes, they expect it to be up and running in January.
Okay.
They're still negotiating with the pharmacies.
All right.
Next is the post-employment health plan. This is something that the IAFF union leadership brought to us that they have an interest in, wanted us to take a look at. We have looked at it, and looks like there could be some benefits to that. A post-employment health plan is basically a tax advantage vehicle so that you can set aside money for health care costs and retirement. So it's triple tax advantage. So when the amount goes into there, the employee doesn't pay income tax, they don't pay Social Security, Medicare, the FICA contributions, so they save that. Any money grows without tax, and then if it's used for qualified expenses, it's not taxed on the back end. Likewise, the county saves on any FICA matching, what the employee pays into Social Security and Medicare, the employer pays also. We would save on that, so it's a savings to both. We have the preliminary discussions were about sick and vacation payout payments going into that. If we based it off of 2015 numbers for all of our employees, it would be a savings of about $44,000 to the county. The employees would save that $44,000 plus whatever their income tax savings are. This plan is mandatory if you go into it. However, that can be broken down by separate bargaining unit, and there are a couple of different ways you can fund it. You can do vacation payouts, you can do a percentage of salaries that go into that account. Since participation is mandatory, we'd like to go through the collective bargaining process with the IAFF and with the Teamsters to see if that's something they want for those employees, because some folks may want to, take their vacation payout and go on vacation rather than have the savings. But with the collective bargaining process, the union can represent those folks and make that determination. So we recommend moving forward with that. It is a potential savings for the county and to the employees.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Davis.
And looking at this, then you say, just so I have this right, it's either none or all to opt into this plan.
Within a bargaining unit, yes.
So is there a way of saying none or all within a bargaining unit if they went through the drop process, they don't have to perhaps? And the reason why I'm just trying to look at it, if they go through drop, in theory, they will have some cash set aside to buy that boat or go on vacation, where they might want to opt into the retirement. Is that enough of a differentiation in the classes versus somebody that it was not eligible for drop, didn't go through that, and therefore they would have to?
We can set up a plan. It's got to be the same for everybody. We may be able to get something like that to work, whereas if it's post-drop, they can do it. We'd have to talk to the vendors and the brokers, but we can definitely explore that.
It was just a thought as far as.
And there are different ways that you can put different amounts in there. You can make an employer contribution. It can be an employee contribution. But once again, so you can say 1% of salaries. That could either be an employer add-on, or that can be an employee contribution. So those two things have different meanings to mandatory. If you say, mandatorily, we're going to make you put 1% of your salary into that, and many employees may not be that happy with that, but we can handle that through the collective bargaining process.
Okay.
So next we've got the employee premium adjustment. So these first charts are just a comparison. So if you look at our current employee premium for family coverage, the employee pays $217.50 a month. In those same surrounding areas, the average is $383 a month. That's including Brevard, St. Lucie, Martin County, and then our other local municipalities, school board, mosquito control district. Some of them are much higher. City of Sebastian over $700. School board's expensive plans almost $600 a month. So we can see that we are significantly below the average of the local governments there. Next is the single employee only. We do not charge a premium there. The average of our neighbors is $38 a month. You see some other zeros there. Many of those are that low cost, high cost option that Commissioner O'Brien was talking about. They may have more of a bare bones plan that they pay zero for, but if they want to pay up for better coverage, then they're paying somewhat of a premium. So
going back to that, so if we can only go 5% cumulative from 2010 which our employee copay, our employee premium zero. How are we going to, is that almost off the table because of the changes and what this would trip as far as for Obamacare? And then what we'd, when you get to 5%, is it total?
So my understanding is with this change, we still would stay grandfathered in 2016-17 with Obamacare because it's a 5% of the split. So we would be going from 100, 0 to 4 and 96%, something like that. So I think we're staying within that 5% threshold. At a certain point, we've ridden the. We think it's been beneficial to stay grandfathered as long as we can. At a certain point, it's just a matter of when, and that's, you know, I think was the plan with Obamacare. Eventually, you can resist and you can resist and you can, but eventually you're gonna give in to us.
Yeah.
And we're holding that day off as long as we can, and it wouldn't be impacted for 16-17 with what we're proposing.
So did I understand that correctly, Jason? We may be able to add a bare bones plan where there'll be no contribution needed by the employee, but maintain our grandfathered status.
We can maintain our grandfathered status for the current plan we have. If we go to a two-tiered one, the new plan would not be grandfathered.
That's how I understood the first time.
But the current plan that we're on, if that's the better plan, that would still maintain the grandfathered status.
Thank you.
And Jason, staff is recommending that we go to eventually a 90-10 split going forward long-term. And then that way, each year we don't have to dicker whether the premium's going to be another $5 or 10 or 20. It's just, here's the premium and it's 90-10 and that's what the number is going to be. So from what you just said, so for 16-17, you're recommending 96 and 4. So that won't trigger the 5%. 17-18, if we do go to the 90-10, then that would trigger the grandfather clause. Is that correct? Or we would lose the grandfather status? Okay.
Guys, we need to be careful about that because it might be one of those things where it's not advantageous to the taxpayers to go ahead and make that 5% jump.
Right.
And if we make that a part of, I mean, I don't know how we could say no if we're saying that's the way it's going to be. I mean, be careful what you wish for. You just might actually get it.
Right. So I think we just have to look at that. You know, say we do approve the 96 and 4, then we'll have a year of that, and we can look at what the impact would be if we lose the grandfather status, what that cost would be compared to the savings if we go to the 90-10.
In other words, we may choose to pay more on our side to keep us in balance of the rule because the cost of going outside the rule
It's so
will
much more. As
exponentially
Commissioner
increase.
Davis would say, the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Right.
at that
It might
point.
taste good at the moment.
Right.
So, okay.
All right, and that is definitely something to consider. So we haven't had a premium adjustment since 2007-08. No employee raises for 4 years there, but we have reinstated the raises and started to allow the employees to kind of recover from that time without raises. And we are recommending that we go to a 90-10 split for the employee-only coverage, the single coverage, and then on the family coverage, we're recommending a 75-25% split. And as Commissioner O'Brien said, it establishes a policy. It sets a policy that's not arbitrary. We're not $25 a month this year. We're going $40 a month, $10 a month. It's basically as the cost goes up, that gets split 75-25 on the family plan and 90-10 on the employee-only plan. We think that's beneficial. It also helps with the we're all in this together thing. You know, I think it's important to communicate that to the employees that hey, our costs are just really going up here, and if you guys can help, you know, go to that pharmacy that costs less, or take actions that help do that, that can help prevent. They're able to control their own destiny a little more too. That if we're all saving dollars, it'll impact our premiums into the future.
And I guess when we kind of go over this again, the premium adjustment, which appears to me to be getting the closest to a substantial enough change that it would eliminate our grandfather. I'd like to know that just how much would it be if we went Just to change the grandfather change the grandfather status for Obamacare, if it was at that, would it be more than a $500,000 hit to the taxpayers? And if so, then how much more of a hit? To give me some idea of about how far do I feel comfortable going?
Yeah, that, so the estimate right now is about 3%. So we're at $16 million right now, so that's about $480,000 hit if we go over that line. So then you've got to overcome those changes. They are providing additional benefits to the employees, but from a cost saving standpoint, you're looking at going backwards for a little bit. Take one step forward, two steps back. So then you got to take a couple more steps forward. We are recommending that we do this over a 2-year period to phase it in, and at our current premium levels, it would be $30 this year and then another $30 next year. The savings to the county this year of doing that's $490,000. I think it's helpful.
Jason, just so, could you go back, please? The 490,000, that's only going the 96 and 4%.
That's, yes, the $30 a month change.
Okay.
Is that, and that's $30 a month change for the employee and family, or
For both,
For
yes.
both.
so? Okay, so it would be $60 a month for a family and the employee.
No.
Total of 30 for the family. Total of 30 for the.
But
for
if
the
you have
single.
both, for example, if you were on the county's insurance, it would be $60 out of your paycheck every month.
No.
For your family.
It's 30.
No.
Either one, everybody, whether they're single or family, would just go up $30. a
Okay.
month.
And then the next year, if they're single, it wouldn't go up for $30, but if they're family, it'd go up to $30.
What we're proposing here would go up 30 both again, so it'd be 30 both. If you're talking about staying away from that Obamacare grandfather, we could look at in the interim, like a 95.5 to where we don't make that second adjustment on the single.
Now, I'm having trouble figuring out how this is going to affect my blue-collar guy that packs his lunch, goes to work every day in Public Works. He's got a family, and obviously himself.
But he's only going to get one policy.
Yeah,
either
he's
gonna have a
included in the
policy
family.
Or a single.
Okay.
He's included in the family.
And the family. Okay, so that's where, so everybody would go up $60 in 2 years, assuming, gotcha,
Right.
okay, I'm clear.
Correct,
Thank
yeah.
you.
So right now, if you're single, you pay 0. If you're on the family, you pay $217.50 a month. Next year, for single, you'd pay $30, going up $30, and then instead of $217.50, we're proposing $247.50, so it'd be a $30 increase.
And another thing I'd like for next week, too, I'd like to know what percentage that is for, and I don't know how to find the average person that's in our in our Teamsters bargaining unit, if there is such a thing. But something, how much exactly of a percentage is that of their income that they make?
Okay.
I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Sorry, just making sure I get the notes down. So, yeah, as far as the split right now, if we look at what the split is on the single, it's obviously 110. So the family split is right now the employee pays about 22.5%, and the county pays about 77.5%. So it's a pretty small change there, and even when we get to that shouldn't trigger the Obamacare number. So it's not much of a move there. The next change is changing the effective date for new hires. Currently, people receive health coverage 30 days after their date of hire, and that's the same as the 30-day open enrollment window. This creates a lot of administrative headache and work for our HR department, also for the constitutional officers' HR departments. I think they tell you it's similarly a problem because someone can decide on day 29, I'm going to add coverage, and then you can't get that implemented, and then you have to go back and make adjustments to their pay plan. You got to go back and do retros with the health insurance, get them added on. It's really an administrative headache. So what we're proposing is just for new hires, if we make it the first day of the month, 60 days after hire, it reduces our administrative burden, and we receive about a month month and a half of savings on average for the employees. If you assume a 10% turnover rate, just making that change is about $150,000 a year savings.
That could put an employee, what, 89 days out?
At the maximum, yeah. So it'd be between 60 and 89 days would be where they are, whereas right now it's 30. So the average is about a month and a half.
And why isn't this something that would have to be negotiated?
Our union contracts basically say that the unions will receive health care in the same manner that's provided to general employees. So for the same way we can make the $30 a month premium change, a change like this can be made the same.
We're treating everybody that way.
Right, right.
Okay.
So like the employee premium adjustment, our employer contribution needs to go up for budgeting purposes. We were planning $150 a month. However, this is putting a huge strain on our budget as we try to balance the budget without a tax increase in the general fund. It's built into the constitutional officers' budgets who have all submitted their budgets with the exception of the tax collector based on the calendar. So we're looking at some cost-saving recommendations here. If we move forward with these, staff's recommending that we can reduce that increase to where we're only going up $100 a month rather than $150 a month. We'll make it easier for us to balance our budget. We'll be able to get it'll be able to reduce the sheriff's budget, clerk of court's budget, all those constitutional officers. And this generates an additional $1.6 million in revenue for the fund for next year.
And just so I'm clear on this, the only thing that Obamacare looks at is the dollar increase versus any plan changes. Plan changes being, there's two ways of getting where we need to be. One is to increase premiums, the other is to decrease the level of service.
Right.
And so, is that an option without stepping over the 5% threshold or whatever that we're talking about?
We've got similar restrictions on those other things, and I'll let Christian expand on this, but if we start making changes to co-pays or go to a high deductible plan or out-of-pocket maximums, if we go more than a certain amount on those, we trigger that grandfather status too. So that's why if you go back years ago, we would come in and say, okay, we're going to increase our specialist copay from $35 to $45. With Obamacare, that's put some restrictions on us that if you do some of those, if you do too much of that, then you can lose that grandfathered status.
Okay, and it's going to be important for me to make a decision on this next week or whenever that decision will be made, for me to see what if we pierce that threshold, what's it going to cost us? What is it going to mean? I'm going to really need to know that information.
Okay.
And if I may, just looking at this slide, I mean, we're basically betwixt the rock and the hard place. I mean, none of us really want to increase the employee contribution, and we held the line last year, but based on this presentation, I don't see how we can not do something. But I'll notice that when you say the premium and the employee and the employer, I mean, when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing the employee and the taxpayer, and the taxpayers, the employee will have to pay $30 a month, which nobody wants them to have to pay, but the taxpayer is paying an extra $100 a month. And because of the way Obamacare works, the taxpayer has no choice himself whether or not he wants to pick up increased medical costs or not. So he's also going to have to pay increased medical costs, but he doesn't have the advantage of a taxpayer behind him to back that up. So there's a good chance that that taxpayer who's paying $100 extra a month to the county employee is also going to be paying that 9% more for himself. So, I mean, that's just something that's in the background for me as I go through this. So is that the end of your performance, Jason, or are you
I've got just a little more. There's one more. There's one more big thing to talk about. If you go to the next slide, it shows our savings. So we're looking at that $3.9 million projected loss. And this adds up all of those changes. So we're looking at $2.8 million in cost savings measures, and what we've tried to do in that split between the employer and employee, or the taxpayer and the employee, tried to do as many things with like the Blue Choice and the Connect and the prescription provider to reduce the total size of the pie. And then we're looking for about $500,000 from the employee and about $1.6 million from the taxpayer. Gets us about $2.8 million, still projecting us a little bit of a loss of about $1 million, and then plan to address that with our changes next year. Then one other change here, just want to talk about OPEB briefly, as it relates to health insurance, and it's part of the funding structure for the health insurance, and this can help us with our budget situation to offset that cost to the taxpayer. So years ago, 2007-08, we had to start accounting for those other post-employment benefits, which are OPEB, and it recognizes the cost as an employee is there, and we established an OPEB trust, and where some other governments have, many have not, to fund those. We ended that subsidy for the employees back in 2006, as we talked about, which has shrunk the number compared to if we hadn't made that change. And just to kind of an analogy of the OPEB trust is like a pension, like a defined benefit pension plan. So in a pension, the employer and the employee put money into the pension fund while they're employed there, and then money comes out of the pension fund to pay their pension when they're retired. An OPEB fund, the OPEB trust is similar. The employer's making contributions into the fund during their employment, and then payments come out of there to pay for a portion of the retirees' health insurance costs. So this is our historic funding level. We started at 0. We've built that up to about $15 million over the last several years as we've been making those contributions. The next slide shows a funded ratio. So in the analogy of pension to OPEB, if you look at a pension and you say, okay, state of Illinois' pension's horribly funded, it's only 48% funded. If you looked at OPEB in the same way, we're only at 37%. That's because we started at 0. And over a 20-year period, we're trying to fund that unfunded actuarial liability. So when you look at it, this last year we put $2.9 million into the OPEB trust. However, on the other side, we had $1.9 million come out of the trust, just like instead of that pension to the employees, there's $1.9 million came out into our health insurance fund to reimburse it. So if we didn't have the OPEB fund, because some folks have said, oh, let's not do OPEB, we shouldn't be funding this. If we didn't do that, that $2.8 million loss last year would have been much, much bigger. So this is just the importance of OPEB to the fund, and then to help with what staff is recommending going forward. So that's just a historical slide of where we've been. The green are the money going into the fund, and then the red's the money coming out.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
I was at a taxpayer association forum, and they were talking about the school board's health insurance situation. I'm assuming that they have some kind of a post-benefit of some kind too, but their number that somebody threw out was almost like 3.9?
3.9 is what they said.
3.9 million, and I'm just wondering, is that based on that they're about where we are, with the exception that they didn't start putting money aside for the post-employment benefits?
Yeah, that may be the case, that they haven't funded it. You're going to have to pay it one day or another. It's kind of like the pensions. The reason that you have the pension plans is you could say, oh, we're going to give you a pension when you retire, and nobody set any money aside, and then they got to retirement and they told the retiree, sorry, no money. So if you're going to provide this benefit, you're setting the money aside, or it also forces you into the decision of, maybe we can't afford this benefit we're providing, so maybe we need to make adjustments, which is where we got to in 2006.
With us biting this bullet in 2006 and moving forward, and it was tough. I mean, I remember people crying at the meeting. But what ramifications, other than perhaps an audit, or I don't know what it is, what ramifications are the other municipalities, commissions, et cetera, what are they facing because they didn't do it, other than?
They don't have, you're only required to account for it and say what it is, and say your liability is this big and it's on your balance sheet. You're not required to fund the OPEB as you go. What you are required to do is pay for your retirees' health care. And what's happening, the reason I think it's so important is we've got a demographic thing going on called the baby boomers. So you got a huge number of your employees. We've been going through it here over the last few years, and we'll continue on. People in drop, people retiring. And the number of retirees, we used to have a very small number of retirees on our plan, because if you go back to 1970s, we didn't have that many employees, and you're growing and you've got the baby boomers. So what's happening is you've got a major hit. If you go back to that earlier slide, rather than, there we go. Oh, this one. So you can see a few years ago we were $1 million for our retiree health costs. We've gone to 1.9 million. The actuary is projecting that for the year we're in, we're 2.4 million. So the change in what we're paying for retiree health insurance is rapidly changing. So just this year, and we've got to make an adjustment for it this year, we've gone from 1.9 million to 2.4 million. So that's a $500,000 hit that otherwise, that's in addition to what you're having to do for your current employees for their health insurance. So I think those other agencies are going to run into funding problems with that. And I think we made the hard decision back in 2006 to go in and fund it. Now we're starting to reap the benefits. We were only getting $1 million back out of it before, but now we're getting $2 million out of it. So we've made that hard decision, and it's really starting to pay dividends for us now. And what I'm wanting to do is, if you move forward, this just shows a split of the OPEB. So it's about $3 million a year for us. That orange pie is the amortization of the unfunded liability. So $2.5 million of it is paying for that 25-year employee that we hadn't set anything aside for the first 15 years of their employment. Our current year cost is only $600,000. So the bulk of that OPEB is really paying to get that balance up higher to where it should be, like if it were a pension plan. So staff has a plan. What we can do is we've got excess funds, in some of our funds, general fund dollars, we're above the fund balance policy. We think it's a good use for one-time expenses, to have a one-time or one-time revenue streams, to have a one-time expense and not fund those recurring expenses with that. So we've got some funds. If we made a $9 million advance payment to the OPEB fund, that would lower our OPEB cost by $900,000 a year. So for every $10 we put in, we have to pay $1 less going forward. So it's like a 10% return for us is what we realize in next year's budget. So if we do that, that would reduce our OPEB payment $900,000 from what it would be. The bad news is we're going up about $350,000 or $400,000 anyway, so the net is about $500,000. So that got a little weedy there, and I apologize for that, but just trying to explain where we are. So, and then if you look at the total taxpayer impact of this, which we're trying to not burden the employees, and we're trying to not burden the taxpayer also. We initially had the $2.4 million budgeted. If we make those recommendation savings, will go down to 1.6 million. However, that OPEB change, if we just pre-fund that, and I say it's like we've got money in this left pocket. If I move it to the right pocket, I've got to pay less in OPEB each year. The only downside, you can't get it back out for anything other than health expenses, but we're pulling it out of there to the tune of $2.5 million a year now anyway. So I'm just moving it from my left pocket to my right pocket. Getting it in the trust, it lowers what we have to pay going forward. So that $500,000 is a savings, so the net impact on the taxpayer is reduced from that 1.6 million to the 1.1 million.
And what do we figure is going to fully fund the actuarially the OPEB trust?
So our unfunded liability, we've got the 15 million in there, but the unfunded liability is about 25 million on top of that. So we'll make headway towards that. This should get us to about 2/3. Yeah.
Jason, before I forget, two things. One, if you could send us a electronic copy of the presentation dated to all the commissioners, but more importantly, if you can make sure on the website that it's readily available with not just the electronic presentation, but the backup. So it's readily seeable for the next week or so for anybody who hits the website, and they can get both the PowerPoint and the agenda backup. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Two
Commissioner
questions. At what point do the OPEBs drop off? Or are they by bargaining unit? Do some go forever, and do some drop off at Medicare time frame?
So essentially what we have right now, we've got two groups of current employees. Those hired before 2006 can get a benefit of, based on their years of service, of 2% a year. So if you've worked here 20 years or more, you can get a 40% discount. You have to have worked here a minimum of 15 years to get it at all. So you can get up to a 40% subsidy. That employee, when they retire, they get that subsidy when they and their spouse are 65 and Medicare eligible, the subsidy goes away.
Okay, so there's a drop back in, period.
Right. So then at 65, the subsidy cost goes substantially away. Most folks, it makes sense to just go on to Medicare and you go get your Medicare supplement. We've got some options for that, but they can just go into the regular marketplace and get Medicare, or they can stay on our plan if they want to, but the subsidy goes away. For those hired after 2006, no subsidy,
Right.
no explicit subsidy at all. There is that implicit thing that we've got to provide based on Florida statutes. We've got to offer our retirees health care at the same cost as our current employees, which is a bit of a subsidy that we can't get out of, but it's much smaller.
Okay.
And Medicare has nothing to do with what age you draw Social Security or anything. It's at 65, you're able to be on Medicare.
At 65, and you can decide to go on Social Security before or after that, based on.
But it doesn't affect whether you do Medicare. You can not go on Social Security until 70, whatever, and start drawing Medicare.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
When you, I had a part two to that. On the $9 million number, was that kind of the sweet spot based on our reserve numbers that are not encumbered? How, if we had it, would we be better off paying the full shortfall to be fully funded, not have to make annual contributions? If you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, there are a couple of things there. One of it is how much can our funds bear? How much of
Right.
the excess do we have? So we don't want to get ourselves out on a limb too much there. And then also, we're mindful of the fact that you can't get the money back out of the trust. So we think it's good to get it on better footing, but it is locking it up in that other pocket. You can't get it back out of there. We don't intend to pull it to do other things with it, but it just maintains that flexibility and maintains our fund balances in the other funds that we don't want to dig those down too deep.
Okay.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Jason, just so kind of a summary so I'm clear, the options you propose are for the upcoming fiscal year, 16-17. And the first one going from Blue Choice to Blue Options, the only impact to employees is we're losing 3 providers. One of them is an out of area doctor that had been used by 5 members out of the 3,600. So a very minimal impact, and we're picking up 8 new providers, so that might offset it. The Connect Diabetes would have no negative impact to employees. The prescription provider would have no negative impact to employees, potential savings because of the no copay. The post-employment health plan would have to be negotiated, and then so the units can determine if they want it or not. So that's kind of a voluntary thing if they decide they want to do it. The OPED advanced funding is not a negative impact. The effective date change is not a negative impact. So really, if I'm getting all this together, the biggest impact to the employees this upcoming fiscal year would be the $30 increase, whether they're an individual plan or the family plan. Every employee would be paying $30 more.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Fletcher.
Open summary. Jason, I'm not a proponent of it, but I just want to revisit the healthcare debit card that some jurisdictions have done to offset some of the costs. Have you explored that to see if that is of a benefit to this county?
We have various options. You can get a debit card for your flexible spending account. You can also have debit cards established as part of a wellness plan. We can build additional options into that, and Christian may be able to talk about other things that we could do. Some places that goes along with a health savings account or a health reimbursement account. Usually those types of things are paired with a high deductible plan, which we had talked about last year, but there didn't seem to be much favor in moving in that direction. So a lot of those are, hey, you've got a $5,000 deductible, but here we've put $2,000 on this card for you to cover your first $2,000, which is good, but then you run into that donut hole question where, at $2,001.
Yeah, but if you, just to dovetail on that, if you're at the $2,500 for the flex, and then you've got the $2,000 on that, and you had a $5,000 deductible, then you had a $500 spread.
Right.
That may make sense for some people.
And we can explore that. We've got that in there in the options for 17, 18. We think employee outreach and education is very important there, because I think we saw that last year. We talked about it and maybe didn't do a good enough job of explaining. And people hear, oh, you got a $5,000, you got a $3,000, deductible. Sounds very bad, but there are ways that you can fund that. You can, the employer can fund a portion of it. You can have the employee fund some of it out of their flexible spending account and bridge that gap so that they're not hit with you got to pay the full cost when you go to the doctor halfway through the year. But we definitely think it's an option worth exploring, and can look at that for next year. We'd definitely lose Obamacare status if we go there.
Commissioner Fletcher.
Then the other point I want to look at was on the prescription plan, the employer contribution, is that fixed or variable depending upon usage?
The employer contribution?
Yes.
So that's one of the things that we're combating is, so the copay on one of our tiers for prescriptions is $30. You go to pharmacy A and the employee pays $30 and the county might pay $60. You can, for that same drug, same day, same quantity, go across the street and it'd be $30 for the employee, $90 for the county.
Yes.
So that's what we're looking at with the Florida Blue thing, is that PPO to make sure that we're steering people towards the 60. And I think they're trying to use their negotiating power to say, hey, if we drive all of this stuff your way, can you go to 50? So that's kind of what's going on there, because, and that's that invisible piece to the employee is they don't know, and they don't, there's really not, the system's not really set up for the employee to know that the county's paying $90 here and $60 there. So things that we can do to kind of help with that are anything we can do there is a benefit, because they're getting the same drug. They just got to go to the east side of the street instead of the west side of the street.
With a prescription, you know exactly what you're getting. It's very unique. A doctor has prescribed a medication. You don't care where it's coming from. You're getting 500 milligrams of a certain controlled substance or medication. And I've seen a tremendous variance with the local pharmacies, and also got some sticker shock when I learned that my copay was adjusted depending upon a certain type of prescription, because there was lawful constraints upon that medication and it was exclusive, and there was no other options for a formulary. And there is a tremendous difference where it goes from $20 to $50, and then you're alerted to the fact that the prescription would have been $950, and that's the concern I have, that the cost to the county is absolutely incredible. You want them to be able to get the medication, but if that list that you were talking about earlier, when will that be available as far as from the pharmacies?
We can have the prescription drug list for the meeting next week. That's available today.
I think that may be beneficial in our decision-making process too. So thank you.
Anything else, Commissioner Fletcher? Anything else before I open it to the public? Would anybody from the public wish to speak on this issue today? Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning, Commissioners. Darrell Lord, Indian River County Sheriff. First of all, Jason and Mr. Baird know how much I love OPEB, and I finally have to concede today that, in fact, they should be applauded from 06, 7, 8, 9, 10 through this. All the struggles that we had with OPEB, obviously, we're on the right track, and I applaud them for the hard work they've done. Albeit we are one of the few sheriff's offices in the state of Florida, in fact the only, that contributes to OPEB, but that's got to do with the knowledge that Mr. Baird and Mr. Brown have. So thank you for that, Mr. Brown. And a couple other little things to think about. I think the 60 days after employment is the private industry standard. I think we can all live with that. Also know that most employees covered under collective bargaining are not afforded those contract rights until after 1 year of service. I think we probably should keep that in mind as well. Chairman Solari, correct on the prescriptions in incarcerated, our inmates. Last year, we dispensed about 650,000 tablets. And much like Mr. Brown's staff has indicated, we have a top 15 list. Ours is unique because of the transient nature and the short time, average stay about 21 days. We have outsourced that. We get a prescription delivery every day from somewhere out of the state. That's reduced our cost. So I don't know that we would be applicable with the county's program in the long run. But I do think that's something that we could discuss in the future as far as cost savings. I have an engagement next Tuesday at 2:30 in Orlando. So I will not, I'll try to be here if we can get this on early, but I do have to speak there. But for the record, as this stands today, the Indian River County Sheriff's Office can live with this proposal.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Sheriff. Anybody else from the public? Good morning and welcome. Name and address for the record, please.
Steve Myers, business agent with the Teamsters. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Do you know what time you're going to have this on the agenda next Tuesday?
Mr. Chairman, I say let's go ahead and do it as early as possible, if that helps you, or does that hurt? What would you prefer?
No, earlier the better for me, because I've got some things next Tuesday I've got on my agenda.
I believe, based on what the sheriff's comment just was, that we can try to put it on as early as possible.
Make it perhaps right after the consent agenda?
Well, if nobody puts on a lot of, proclamations,
You can see that coming.
we can have it on even earlier.
I like a time certain, perhaps 9:30.
I don't know if that time certain matters, but what I was
as long as it's before noon for me, I'm good.
well, we'll have it before noon.
I don't know. I mean, the sheriff may want it to be earlier. I mean, I think
needs the
he's.
sirens to get to Orlando. I'm not too worried.
How about this as a directive, that we have it immediately after the consent agenda, that we ask staff to avoid anything controversial on the consent agenda, which it generally does, and that we try to have some restraint in the terms of proclamations for next week. Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to digest most of the things I received on Thursday regarding this, so I'll save most of my comments for next week. But I would just like to give a little input on a couple of things. One being the amount of reserves in the healthcare plan. I think the board, as a policy, needs to adopt a ceiling on the amount of money that's kept in that plan. Right now, there is no ceiling. So if you're spending, if annual costs are $16 million, I think currently you're required to have at least 25% of that funded, just in case you have run-out cost if you ever decide to go fully funded again. Right now, do you know what that number is, Jason? Is it 14-some million?
At the end of last year, I think we were close to 14, and we are required to have that 3 months. Anybody who's self-insured in Florida, like we are, has to show they've got that 3 months. You also got your incurred but not reported, which is usually about a month worth. So you add that all up together, and you're talking about really a $7 million floor. So 14 million sounds like a significant portion, and it is a lot of money. But we're projecting a loss of about $2.5 million this year, and if we don't make changes, we're looking at $4 million. So that'll be gone shortly. We're also looking at that as some of the funding source for the OPEB pre-funding to take some load off of our. Particularly the general fund and the emergency services
right,
district.
And I think so. Even assuming the floor, it would be $7 million. I still think it would be good policy if the board adopted a ceiling also, so you stay between a certain amount. That while it wasn't good that last fiscal year or this fiscal year that we were 2.3 million in the deficit. Also, it probably wasn't great policy that in 2009 that you were 3.2 million. On the plus side. So I think it would help create a better balance if you had a floor and a ceiling. That way you don't go to such extremes. The other part I wanted to address today is if you offer different plans, a lower plan. I think in my experience with employers that have done this, it can be a good option, but it has some unintended consequences. Some of the unintended consequences is people know if they use the healthcare plan a lot, if they're healthy or not. So what you end up with is the unintended consequences. All the really healthy people go to the low plan because they know they're not going to use it at all anyway. some people that just refuse to go to the doctor whether they're sick or not. So your cost will stay cost neutral or maybe even drop in that lower plan, and then you'll experience a negative impact with increased cost on the current plan that you're under. So, and that's normally an immediate impact. You'll see that the first couple years. Now it'll level off over the years, but keep that in mind, and I would rely on your insurance experts to kind of give you a little more guidance in that area. But if you make that change, it sounds really good, but then next year your current plan that you have is going to be going through the ceiling, and the low plan is going to be flat, and everybody's going to want to say, hey, we just need to put everybody on the low plan. So I think you need to look at what the unintended consequences may be on that as you're looking at this whole thing, and kind of rely on your healthcare experts to give you advice in that regard.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Jason, on that reserve, you'd mentioned a couple things about using, say, 2.4 million for this year's, another million or so next year's, but also transfer of a portion of the reserves to fill the OPEB. Could you give maybe a 3-year pro forma based on where we are now at the $14 million in reserves, and based on your plans to show what the reserves will be at the end of the 3-year period?
Yep.
Based on, obviously, you don't know what the loss will be for next year, but I mean, with your best guess of the loss for the next 2 years, included with this year's loss?
We can do that. I like pro formas almost as much as you do, so we'll be glad to.
I'm just wondering, now that you're moving from the finance to the county administrator spot, if you're still going to like them as much.
Yeah, I get to delegate the work now. So that's
I guess from now on, I'm going to have to be talking to Mike about these
Yeah,
spreadsheets.
you better hope Mike likes pro formas.
I'm confident he does. Gentlemen, any other questions? Commissioner Davis, I'm
Yes,
happy to get a motion from you.
I move that we postpone this until the next meeting to be placed immediately after the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Davis, second from Commissioner Flesher. Anything else? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just if we could, kind of outside of this, I really do think it would be incumbent for us to, as far as have the administration reach out to the bargaining units and ask them, after seeing the presentation, getting all the information, do they have any questions and concerns that perhaps we overlooked that they might be able to bring to our attention, so that we don't get them at the next meeting and then don't know what to do with it.
That'd be good.
Mr. Brown is already committed to having contact and meetings with all of the bargaining units. So I just hoping that, I know that he'll share that information.
I don't even know, even the non-bargaining unit, I don't know how they would come forward, whether they have any questions, but if they'll let us know or let me know somehow, I'll certainly forward those to the right people.
Sounds like an HR question.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank everybody. I thought this was a very good presentation. Jason, good job. If that's as I lead into your job as a county administrator, I think it's a good start. But I'd like to thank everybody else involved. It's clearly a very difficult, complex subject about which most of us aren't really, I don't think, on top of it. So I was pleased with the presentation. I hope that the public and the employees got as much out of it, and I hope that they're aware that this information will be on the website, hopefully very quickly. And as Commissioner Davis has said, we'd like as much input as possible prior to the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Fletcher.
With that in spirit, we know we have the commitment with the bargaining units, and yes, I think all employees should have that opportunity. Well, I had a question as far as HR, how we can achieve that to get out to all of the employees in a timely fashion if they had any input or questions, reservations about what was presented today.
Well,
we could email the entire presentation to.
We could do an email to employees, and we can also refer them to the website and tell them they can contact HR with questions or concerns. And just everybody's should be able to get to the website as well, and just they can concerned employees can forward their comments to HR, and we'll try and handle those through that process.
This way, each and every voice can be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have one last question for the consultant. When we looked at under the savings side where we have the diabetes management side. Was there any other illness group or ongoing, reoccurring medical treatment? Obviously, it looks like that works well. Diabetes, it's somewhat predictable, the treatment, the things that you need to take on, and basically forever once you have it. Was there any other ones that we looked at that made sense to consider, but maybe the savings wasn't, great enough to put in there? But I'm wondering, did you look at any other groups of treatment options?
Yes. When we reviewed the claims data from the prior years, diabetes is definitely the significant cost driver, with over $1 million in claims in 1 year. Of that $1 million, $623,000 is in prescriptions alone.
Okay.
The next category that we can really have a control over would be high cholesterol, which your costs are only around $215,000. So we feel that the diabetes is extremely important. And when we look at the list of all of the medications that people are taking, your high cost drivers are not really individuals that we can affect in terms of a wellness program. So some of the cost drivers are multiple sclerosis, cancer, cystic fibrosis. So there's some different costs associated with those. So diabetes, with the wellness program putting in, is we're eliminating the cost barrier for the employee. So they're no longer going to have to pay for their test strips or their lancets or their glucometer. And we're pairing it up with a program that has nurses, and once the employee checks their blood sugar levels, the glucometer uses mobile technology to send it to the actual employee's doctor, and also the nurses, so that make sure that people are in compliance and are having good sugar levels.
Okay, one other item. When we looked at, say, on the pharmacy portion where the employee pays 10 and it could be 60 or 90 depending on which pharmacy you go to, is there a big swing in the cost of if my kids are sick during the day, I can call my pediatrician, try to get in before 4:30, and then you gauge, okay, can he make another day to go to a regular appointment tomorrow? And then the earache problem comes up and it's 9 o'clock and you go, can I get into Care Spot or one of the walk-in type places before they close? So I imagine the cost of delivery going to your primary physician is probably the lowest cost. Then going into a walk-in type clinic is the next tier. And then obviously the worst case scenario is if you end up in the emergency room, that's a really big hit. So finding ways to get the treatment earlier to your lowest cost provider is helpful. But and this is it's a bit of a curiosity item, but if you took maybe 2 standard reoccurring items that if you go to your primary doctor, it might be, the copay, if it's a non-specialty doctor, what the cost is, and then as you ratchet through the system, just to show your primary physician cost is X, presumably the lowest cost, and as you go through the system, the worst case scenario emergency room visit is a really big X. We know it's a much larger number. And that kind of goes into the preventative or early care or early intervention and things. So you start working on the problem earlier before it gets to be a very, very expensive problem. It's very cheap in the beginning, but if you wait, it becomes incredibly expensive for everybody.
Yes.
I don't know if there's any way to do some type of generic example to just show that could be part of an education piece that, if you can get into your primary one, that's the best for everybody. In trying to educate to keep costs lower and make conscious decisions, I think there's, not county employees, but I think there's some residents of the county that if you look at the emergency room visits and the traffic that's going through there, that is their primary care physician, is show up in the emergency room, and that from the indigent care side that we fund and the other things just has a huge cost component.
And that's important in all this to work into our employee outreach and education and continue with that, and it also goes into wellness. You know, with untreated, sometimes people avoid going to the doctor, and
Right.
it can be good to go ahead and get there before, while the problem's small, before it becomes a big problem, so we can continue on and develop that stuff better as we go, for sure.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Yeah, Commissioner Zork, there's another potential pool out there facing us, and that would be middle-aged male commissioners with bad knees. But we've reduced that pool by 20%, so that's trending favorably right now. So just
Well, with that, I think it's probably a good time to call the question. We have a motion from Commissioner O'Brien, seconded by Commissioner Fleischer. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0, and this is a great time for a 10-minute break. Thank you.
I believe that was.
Now reconvene the meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, and we move on to Utility Services, Automated Meter Reading, Advanced Metering Infrastructure Update from Mr. Burke, the head of our Utility Department. Good morning, Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. We're here to talk about some acronyms and how we do business in the Utilities Department with respect to meter reading. So we're going to start off with a little outline of how we got to this place, some of the metrics that talk about where we are at. Some of that information is contained in the agenda backup. We're going to look at some of the options available to us in the Utility Department, outline some of the pros and cons, and finally wrap up with some recommendations. So back on August 19th of 2014, there was an award of RFP. It should be 2014-043 to Langham Consulting to look at the feasibility analysis of business case development, some data summary, some of the options available in the marketplace, related technologies, and strategic assessment. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of the detail, but I'm here to say that we've distilled a tremendous amount of information that has been looked at, that has been vetted, and that has been thoroughed out, if you will, to come up with a short and sweet presentation, which we're here to go over today. So bear with me. Currently, we serve about 110,000 people throughout Indian River County. About 48,000 water meters, just shy of 48,000 water meters, with the majority of those being 5/8 inch inside, serving our residential customers. Now, there's some various larger sizes that serve mobile home parks, commercial customers, and like, but again, 95% of those are over 5/8 in size. Of those water meters that we have, 33 and change are manual read. That means the meter readers are manually reading those each and every month, 70% of our meters. And prior to my arrival, it's called BV, before Vinny, is that about 14,000 were installed with AMR technology, which is an acronym for Automated Meter Reading. So this was something that was started in the utility world to look at automating the meter reading process. And most recently, as noted in the backup, we have seen a large increase not only in the building department COs, but the number of new installs. And we've averaged anywhere from 90 to 107 new meter installs a month. So we are continuing to grow and looking at some of these projects that were on the sideline that are now coming to fruition. So just in brief, we wanted to let you know, and you may already know this information, so apologies if it's something you already know, that we manually read the meters, about 33 and change. So once a month, the meter readers drive in their vehicles with their lights on. They get out of the truck. They go to the house, the right-of-way where the meter's at. They have to lift the lid, which you can see just below that truck. Sometimes it comes off easily, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, there's a meter to the picture to the right here. You can see the meter. We flip that lid and we get a manual read. Now this is a clean box. Not always those boxes are clean. Sometimes in other parts they're underwater and it's hard to actually get a read. Sometimes the glass is scratched. So the meter readers have to do this continually in and out of the car multiple times. And some routes there are 350, 400 so meters in a route, and they do this throughout the day. So I just want to say a big thanks to our meter readers, like Robert and Brian and Sean and Robert, a couple of Brians, that they really do an excellent job, I think, in very adverse conditions with a lot of time constraints that are asked of them each and every day in order to get accurate reads, to get out of their truck, to make sure they input the meter readers numbers correctly, and then to get that into our system. And as always, we always have pressing deadlines, so there's not a lot of room for error and or wiggle room to try to get that done. I think my battery died. A little bit more about the manual reading process. Again, we talked about the frequent stops and starts. We just add some of the information with regards to the high mileage. Just for 6 of the meter readers and looking at March and April of this year, you can see that's quite a lot of miles. About 1,000, averaging about 1,000 per person throughout the month, crisscrossing the county, making sure we get the reads. Vehicle maintenance costs, obviously, we looked at snapshot in fiscal year 14-15 for the fuel repairs. Since fiscal year 2005-2006, we've seen an increase in the number of accounts, almost 18% the number of accounts for the customers that we serve. But the staffing levels with respect to the meter readers has remained constant. In the 265 division, we've actually decreased the number of full-time employees. We're down 8.5% since that time. So I think the acronym holds true a little bit for the utility readers. We are doing more with less. AMR, this is automated reading technology. kind of distilled it down to a very basic set of drawings here to give an idea of what AMR talks about. Again, some of this investment was made prior to my arrival. It is a drive-by system where you have the house that's located on the left-hand part of your screen. You have a little meter that's sitting in the right-of-way, and then an output device that sends either through 900 megahertz, and some of them use 450 megahertz, to a mobile data collection system. So it sends out a small pulse at periodic time points. We have a mobile data collection system that comprises of an antenna, software, hardware to collect that. We collect that remotely, and then it's brought back into our third-party billing software, from which case our billers then turn that into the bills that go out each and every month. So it's a very efficient system. We can, in some cases, do the 350, 400 meters in a route in about 40 minutes, as opposed to doing that in 7 or 8 hours on the manual process. So again, a very efficient system. It currently interfaces with our billing system, and just talked about some of the specific requirements for the AMR. One thing that we also looked at, and I see that we have waste management here, is reserving our right to possibly think outside the box. So we think about the fact that we have our meter readers crisscrossing the county. We also have the same with respect to our garbage collection. So we put a specific clause in the contract, not to say that we're going to exercise that clause, but just to reserve the right that if we wanted to perhaps purchase some technology, antenna, and or hardware to put on the meter trucks that are literally driving by each and every meter once a week anyway, we thought that we'd be able to at least keep that avenue open as a way to continue to do business and increase efficiency for our customers.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
question on that. If we utilize something like that, is their route structure 100% match with or close to that for where our meters are located?
Right. I mean, what we would envision is not disrupting what waste management has to do.
Right. They would
In fact,
do their normal
yep,
route.
And it specifically says that we release them from any liability. And so what we do right now is once a month collect those reads. We would then
Right.
anticipate getting in at 3 or 4 times a month, so that through the routes that they have, we would then have 3 or 4 sets of data that we'd be able to use to combine for that monthly bill. But certainly our routes are vastly different than
Right.
what the
okay.
garbage
So
folks
we
have.
would get a percentage of it, probably a
Yep.
significant percentage, but it wouldn't be the whole.
Yep, yep. But again, we are traveling the roads with recycling. We're going by, even if somebody doesn't put out if they choose not to have garbage, or if they don't put out the recycling bin, maybe the neighbor does, we're still picking up that
Right,
read as we're
okay.
driving by. So the downfall with this is that we wouldn't have any way to quality check the system, QA, QC. Obviously, it would occur at the end of the day, where waste management bring it in. There's some logistics that I want to bore you with some of the details as far as the hardware, the interface with the server, and the third-party billing, that the logistics would be intensive to try to make sure we have a QA, QC in place, and then actually have to then perhaps go back out to some of these routes if we didn't get the reads on a particular route. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there as an option that staff had looked at, just to make sure that we kept some of our options open. And the third one is AMI, which is Advanced Metering Infrastructure, where you in essence have the same sort of meters in place with a device output. Again, it could be at 900 megahertz, it could be at 400 megahertz. It's on an FCC licensed spectrum that transmit to a central location. In this case, it could be a water tower or other antenna in a strategically located area where you'd have a mesh network. So if you lost one of the antennas, you wouldn't lose the ability to collect that data. It would also allow you to still drive by if for some reason we lost power at one of the antenna. We do experience lightning here in River County, that we would still be able to go back to an AMR type system with a drive-by capability. But in essence, these collectors would get that information and transmit to a central location, in this case to host server, that would house that data and then interface with a third-party billing software. What's unique about this, and what we really like, is the fact that this host server would have the same information that would be used for our billers, but also to be able to be used on the internet for those folks who either have a desktop PC, a mobile app. And I know that some of our customers today are demanding more information, higher transparency with regards to real-time data, not necessarily just a snapshot or once a month consumption. For instance, I get my water bill, we use about 6,000 or 7,000 gallons a month, but I don't know if that means that we're using that in the evening hours, we're using that in the morning hours, but certainly having real-time data would allow us to be able to provide that information for our customers. What's required for an AMI system? Again, that's an acronym for Advanced Metering Infrastructure. Well, you need a transmitter and encoder on each meter to send that to a central location. We have to have a collectors on the tower that pulls that information in. And you have to have a backbone, and that's really where the costs are. The equipment's not that expensive, relatively speaking, but the backbone is. And through some foresight, through telecommunications, and through Public Works, and working with some of those good folks, we actually have a very good backbone in place with some of the fiber optics, some of the consortium that's in place with the city and the school board, to where we'd be able to tie in very easily to a central location. And then you need a server to host that data, to be able to download that data, to manage that data, and that data needs to then interface with our current billing system. I talked about still having the optional drive-by collection system manual information if for some reason we lose power at those towers or we can't collect those data points remotely. So really the reason why we're here today is to say that our business practice needs to change, and I do say that our existing business model is not sustainable. Most recently, a change in our business practice has come to our attention that has in essence doubled the time that it takes us to do the manual read. So when we were doing some of these routes in 4 to 5 hours, now it's taking us 7 to 8 hours of time.
So
and what
was that the COI modification?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And so what that means is we now have a shorter timeline in which to get these. We're not going to be able to keep up not only with our existing customers with the high demand for accuracy, but that we might have to start guesstimating reads, which we've never done here in Indian River County, at least not systematically, being unable to read those meters. So we're really kind of in a tight bind to try to look at how we can stay efficient, look at our business practices today, and also make a determination if we want to keep doing this 5-10 years down the road while we continue to grow as utility. So I just highlight the fact that a lot can happen at the bottom of the page there between when we actually read it and when we go back to get that read a month later. Over 43,000 minutes that happen, and we have had some instances where leaks have occurred. Some of those calls have gone above my head, and the customer wants to find out where that water has gone. And having an AMI type system will allow us and the customer to really truly pinpoint what happened. So some of the benefits associated.
Is there a way of knowing whether you have a leak before the actual bill is due? Because I'm just thinking of the dollar savings, for example, whenever we had people going down and doing things to the system, the actual dollars that was lost because potable water was wasted.
Yep.
And if we somehow could have some alert on that, it would just about pay for the system quick, you'd think.
And that's the beauty of this, is right now we don't have that alert built in. We have a manual process where either somebody calls us, the meter reader notifies us, or one of our field crews is out there and says, hey, we have a leak. And we can address that leak and we can work with the customer. Having an AMI system exactly has that capability. It will create a metric to where you can then look at what the normal usage is. Say it's 400, 500 gallons a day. And if you have a spike, it will alert not only the customer, but it'll alert us, the utility, so then we can dispatch a technician or somebody out there so that you can attend to that leak before it becomes a 100, 150,000 gallon leak per se.
Okay, and I'd be able to follow that if it were between the meter and the house.
Yep.
And the tap somewhere. What if it's in the main somewhere?
If it's in the main, we're running 63 to 65 PSI. We don't have that technology in our main per se. There is technology that I've looked at that allows us to do sonic frequency detection that puts, if you will, a transducer on specific strategic valves in our system, where we have, say, 8, 12, 16-inch valves that we can then acoustically detect if there's an anomaly, like a large rush of water, say, if a hydrant is being opened or if a fitting fails. So right now we're looking at those things, but we don't have anything in place, at least prior to the customer, to be able to have a, if you will, a more real-time basis on our system. We are looking at some of those things to better help us. Because at the end of the day, non-revenue water is something that we talked about in there, and that's a big component for us. Whether you're talking about leak detection or theft or just water loss in the system that we have to report to for our consumptive use permit, that the DEP has to know about, and especially with regards to a water audit that we try to do every month. So we talked about some of the leak detection, tampering detection, and some of the backflow. The system that is in place with an AMI has the ability to know if reverse flow has been detected, either through a fail in the check valve, in a residential check valve, or due to a higher pressure anomaly in the system. So that's one of the alarm points that can be set that we can be alerted to for additional investigation. We talked about reducing some of the carbon emissions. If in the case that AMI is implemented, we can take a look at how we currently do business, number of the trucks that are out there rolling on the roads each and every day, with the insurance liability, with the salaries and benefits, and with some of the depreciation costs that have to be looked at. And finally, the daily and final bill efficiencies. I talked a little bit about that in the agenda item, where we get a voluminous amount of requests for not only the daily but final bills that need to happen. So we have non-standard meter reading issuance to have for the guys to go out there to get that final bill, to get that read, so that we can have a quick turnaround for our customers. And we do have some tenants that shift location quite frequently, and we just need to make sure that we have a good, efficient system in place to keep up with that. And I talked a little bit about the number of dailies and final bills in the agenda item. So again, Commissioner Davis, to your point, leak detection, this would be for services after the meter per se. The agenda is not specifically tied to having distribution main leak detection, but certainly the point I was trying to illustrate is you have almost like an average here, and then there's an anomaly. But we would not see that anomaly until, again, somebody called that in or somebody had done that read. And by that time, it could be several days with thousands of gallons of water having been lost. Faster response, where everybody's moving to, not everybody, but most people are moving to a mobile technology to where folks can want to see their consumption on their devices so that they can make better decisions about the water usage that they have.
Yeah.
So the cons of an AMI system, again, to be quite honest with you, the cons are quite large with regards to the cost. This is a very costly endeavor. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that the costs are not a big issue, because they are. It's a very costly endeavor to switch from the manual process to invest in some of the technology and to invest in a change of business. But in our opinion, that cost is worth it, offset by the fact that we can drive better customer service, more transparency, better data, and really make better decisions on how we operate in regards to the non-revenue water, in regards to the leak detection, in regards to some of the theft that we have out there. Believe it or not, there are people that like to take our meters and put a straight pipe in there, and we don't know anything about it until we happen to go out there and get the read. And not to say that it happens a lot, but we've had a few instances of that in the past. So. One of the things that comes with an AMI system is the training that's going to need to be involved. Training holistically, not only for the folks that are out there working on these units, some of the folks that may have to maintain the system in place, but also for the customer service folks that sit on the front desk and are getting calls and complaints. And so, and looking at the industry and talking to people that have made the transition, one thing they did say is, in this case, having more data causes more questions. So we need to be prepared if and when that decision is made to do that, to not only be trained in the system, but be prepared for the questions and the calls that are going to come in from some of those customers looking to get more information. Well, why did my usage spike, and what does this mean, and how come I'm using 30% more this month than I was last month? So that is something that comes with the territory. So thinking about future-proof technology, you guys may recall what this is a bag phone. It puts out about 5 watts years ago. And then they revolutionized the cell phone industry, and Motorola did to this nice little flip phone, and that was the cutting edge in 2004. But you can see what a long way we've come in those years, those 20 years, to where we now have these smartphones and these apps and these handheld devices that are quite powerful and have good processors in there. The reason why I illustrate this is because when we invest in meters, we're investing in meters and meter technology, not for 5 years, but for 10, 15, possibly 20 years. Believe it or not, we still have some quite old meters that are in place, and that's part of the process to change those out. But certainly, technology is changing very rapidly. We want to make sure we do our due diligence to see what the vendors have out there, to see the scalability, to make sure that we don't have any legacy systems that are left out and about so that we have to constantly reinvest in new technology. But just to illustrate the point that what's happening in the cell phone world is still happening through the computers and other metrics.
Vinny, along those lines, I remember in '94, I remember getting a $1,000 cell phone bill. And of course, now it's down unlimited everything for $99. So the same, I mean, how do you see this technology as far as today it looks expensive? What is it from the original AMI or the, I'm going to say the postmodern era of the AMI, as close as we can possibly get in the price per unit versus where it is now?
That's a great question. I mean, the technology, whether or not you talk flat screens, cell phones, or other technology, is driving these numbers down. And so competition is fierce. We've seen that already. I think that Indian River County has been fortunate not to be, the cutting edge at the time, because some of those folks that have invested in the primary part of that investment have now had to reinvest. I'll give you an example. At Port St. Lucie, they invested a lot of money. They did the install for AMR technology in-house, and now has decided they want to go AMI. So they're actually purchasing additional upgradable pieces that go on to their meter technology for additional investment. So I see that the economics of this are driving down the cost. The biggest caveat that I see right now is some of this stuff is proprietary. I would, in my ideal world, would like to have an open source, kind of like the TCP/IP, where the internet has a standard protocol, where some of these meter technologies, whether or not you're talking about company A, say Badger, or Census, or a Neptune, or Master Meter, they all have their own little fiefdoms, if you will, and you're kind of tied in. What I would like to see is a opening up of that technology and that standard, that platform, so that regardless of the output of a specific meter, you can pick software company A, B, C, and D, because that's going to drive innovation even more, and competition will keep everybody on the level. So with the increase in technology, I think it's driving the cost down. We've already seen that for some of the vendors that we reached out to, and what we are looking at for different municipalities today, Orange County, Daytona, that are actually switching to AMI, and I think we're going to continue to see that trend as it continues. But
I'm going to make a prediction. Instead of having to use towers and all that kind of stuff, we'll be able to use this to send it to our...
And that's what they do. So you have to make a decision whether or not you want to invest in the tower and have that where we actually have some infrastructure, or if you want to invest in the bandwidth. And I equate it to like a 10-lane highway, and we're using the bike lane, if you will. We have a very small amount of data that can travel really on a 3G network, and there's companies that have already invested in the cellular technology. So one of the things as part of this RFP is to say, okay, what are the cost benefits of using a 3G or 4G or 4LTE cell phone backbone, where the infrastructure and the maintenance costs are on, the onus is on the AT&T, the T-Mobiles to maintain that, but then you're paying a yearly cost to buy that bandwidth. Or is it better for us to invest in tower technology where we own the equipment, we are perhaps paying an FCC license, but yet we are not tied to other cost variability that the tower company is going to charge us. So there's options as far as how to get the data, whether or not to use a 3G or whether or not to use a centrally located tower.
What would be what's the distance one of these signals can go? I mean,
It depends, and that's why we wanted to do a little area. Some of them claim, up to 8 or 9, 10 miles. In reality, based on some of the type of graphic, geography that's out there, with water being in some of the meters, it's going to vary. It might only be a mile or 2. So we have to take a look at perhaps where we have high water table, where we have dense trees and foliage, where we have some houses that are maybe at a lower density, so that we can come up with a system that's going to work. And really like cell technology, where you have the overlap, so that if one tower goes out, you don't lose the ability to capture that data.
Okay. I have a couple questions. Vinny, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, and I think next week I had reached out and just posed the question to the FP&L folks, just to say, since they've converted to I don't want to use the word smart meter, but that's what they call it, that is there any device that they have, and can they transmit any other person's data from the water meter box to the electric meter wirelessly, and then send that data or point it to wherever it would need to be? I think they're going to have something next week to say, yes, that's something that they can do or can't do as maybe another option to the mix. Okay. Also, since it's meter reading, but it's really a communications big portion of it, how do we communicate the signal? I'd encourage, depending on how things go today, I asked Jason if Communications International has some ongoing contracts, just to pick their brain a little bit. When I spoke with somebody up there, they said there's certain frequencies, certain bandwidths and things that looking forward on the horizon, that good, bad, otherwise, that might, pick their brain and see anything that they could say, hey, this is something as a problem they see on the horizon. On the waste management side, on the recycling, that would cover really pretty much every property in the county, whether it has a water meter or not, because everybody has, they may not participate, but from a route structure wise, and that would get you from 1 reading a month to 4 a month that way. Not as ideal, but it's better than what we have. And then in our regardless of whichever system you go to, I would still think you'd have some type of quality assurance manual check number, so you couldn't say that we would, and not that you have, but you wouldn't completely go to zero your cost for meter reading, because I think you would always have some percent factor of, we're going to randomly screen 1% of the bills a month or something, just to fact check. And I think at some point it's always good to visually see something, whether boxes have been crushed or whatever the conditions are around. So I think we will not stop completely visiting a visual inspection of some type, or manually reading to just cross-check it to validate what the electronic system has. So there's, and obviously I think the technology shift is driving things. Using Wesley's cell phone bill, I don't think I ever saw one that big. But
Used to happen to me all the time back in the 90s.
Really?
Man, it was bad.
Were you auctioning on the phone?
No, I was buying fruit.
So I'm wondering, is there the next big technology shift that might, and I don't know what it would be. Obviously, when we're at FAC, that will be one of the questions if we see any of these types of vendors around. Is there something that's on the edge of coming out that should be thrown in the consideration mix? So I think it's a great tool to have. It's just which plan do you go with? Getting the data 4 times more often than you get it at one cost. The transmitting side, going with the AMI, is really kind of the best of all worlds. You have instant reads. You'd have flow detection of how much water consumption is, where you could really get detailed billing. It's kind of like when you get your cell phone bill and you text and you look, maybe the first month or two, you look at how much you used it, but since it's unlimited, you don't really focus on it like you used to when you got a certain portion of minutes or cap with your billing. Regardless, if we didn't do anything today, we have a number of meters that probably need to be changed just because of their age. And would that be, looking at on backup page number 168, so the 16, let's see, it says cost to replace 48% of the dialogue meters. Are those all needing replacement? In other words, are they kind of aged out and need to be recycled, or are those just ones that are moving towards the step to the AMR? So if this wasn't a discussion, will we still be looking at that expense kind of anyway?
Right, yep.
Okay.
We have to do that anyway.
Right, okay. So that's sort of a base number that we have to spend anyway. And then the numbers as you go forward, cost to convert the 33,426 meters, if we replace the 48% of the 16,045, I'm trying to see, do you have to add any of these numbers together? Of the 33,000 meters, that's to go to AMR. And then the last one would be is to do 100% change out of everything for all 47,000 meters. So the first one is something we have to do anyway, so that, I don't say it's off the table, but it's sort of, that's a fixed number that we have to bite the bullet on anyway. Then the others are depending on which option you want to go with. Do we know how many, and it's less today than it was a couple of years ago, but we have a lot of projects that were approved or are coming back to life, do we know how many potential customers that have maybe water meter boxes, that the box is there but the meter's not been installed yet? As those are customers on your, I'd say, near horizon. You'd roughly know how many that would be?
I want to say about 10,000 or so. We have some reserve accounts.
Probably be about 3,000 to 4,000. But the issues we've seen on some of those subdivisions that you're referring to are, although those meter boxes were put in place back in 04, 05, 06, when
Right.
things were wonderful and everybody was making money and building homes, a lot of times they've since been destroyed, the lids
Right.
are missing, the boxes are crushed. And in some cases too, they replat those subdivisions, so those locations of the
Or not,
boxes
right.
are no longer appropriate for the new plats. So a lot of that part of the infrastructure ends up being replaced anyways when they start
Yes.
building in those areas.
Yeah, and I agree with that. They kind of get smashed by the bush hog mower and all the other things. I was trying to see how many customers that are on the horizon that we would build in, that would be their meter from the get-go, from the start,
Well,
in capturing those.
That would be those, and that's kind of the numbers that Mr. Burke had in his presentation, the 97 to 107 meters we're doing a month. A lot of those, the majority of those meters, not all, because some of them are in the Highlands where we already had services, but a big majority of those are the builders that are coming along and building in those subdivisions
The existing.
that were dormant. So a lot of those new starts you're seeing are those numbers that you're referring to.
Right, okay. So we have around 3,000 to 4,000, and then I know we have like the South County Initiative where there's no lines or anything in place yet, but there's talks of some of those coming online, which
Right,
would
so
be
they're a little
a few
unknown
thousand.
yet at this time, but
So
a few
so
more
the sooner
thousand there.
we come up with what the plan is as we go forward, we can be putting in what the future.
You'd put in
meters-
whatever we choose to go, whether it was the AMR, the AMI, or the AMR system that we already have the 14,000 of. You know, you'd want to start in those places with whatever you go with. You wouldn't want to have to retrofit those
Right,
in
right.
2 to
That's what I
3 years.
was thinking, is getting ahead so that you didn't have
Right.
to retrofit something you just
Right.
put in.
Exactly.
Can an AMI meter type kind of downscale itself to transmit like an AMR does, or are they completely different?
No, it can't.
Okay.
How much does this add to the meter for a home?
Well, those are some of those numbers that are on that chart, and right now, we're paying over just $181 each for an AMR meter, the system that's currently, we have the 14,000 of, and most of the subdivisions that we're working in right now, if they're new, we're putting in those meters. We're not gonna go backwards and put in a manual and add manual routes when we're not expanding staff or anything, so we go to that system. The bids, when we started the process with a consultant back in 2014, we were looking at between $300 and $350 per meter if we went to AMI at that time. Those were the current bids that were out on the street and current projects that were ongoing at the time. For the same system, now we're looking at prices that are more between $195 to $250 a meter. And the active, there's a list also in Mr. Burke's agenda item of some of the more recent projects. And the competition's out there, but the prices differ. I mean, some of those are like $191 they came in at a meter, others came in at the $250 in a relatively short time frame. So there is still a large margin unknown out there where we would come in, and until we get something out on the street, it'll be hard to say. But the trend that we are seeing is those prices, as technology goes along, as more and more competition becomes in the market, it seems like these newer bids that are being awarded are going down from what we've seen.
On that same question, are the new meters still a brass type meter?
Yes.
Because
They have to be the lead-free now and
Yep.
whatnot, but there are some composite meters on the market. We've actually have a few in the ground here that are the manual type, but we've got about 100 of those in the system that we put in over the last 2 years, and we had to replace meters anyways, and we got a few of those to see how they're going to hold up.
Right, that's good.
They're not real widespread enough and haven't been around long enough to know just how well they're going to last yet.
Okay. Last thing, if you went with a waste management or another company that has a monthly recurring billing, would we also then consider looking at getting a price for them doing the actual billing mailing, since they're already mailing to a customer? I would think mailing postage to 47,000 people a month, if somebody else is also mailing to the same 47,000 people, or a good portion of them, you could have just a huge postage savings if there was some way to piggyback billing, if it was a Waste Management or somebody else, as another cost savings measure.
Right. I mean, at this point, we didn't look at that as part of the feasibility process, but that's something we can look into. I know the county has invested in quite a bit of technology to create the bills and to work with vendors to provide those bills on a monthly basis, but certainly there's fixed costs associated with that. We can look at what those costs are versus what some economies of scale
Isn't
may
it a
be out
different
there.
set of customers? Do we send individual bills for the recycling customers?
It is a different set of customers,
So
yeah,
it's-
so it wouldn't be a
so it
complete
doesn't-
overlap.
You can't do it.
That's-
Commissioner Fleischer.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, thank you so much for your in-depth research to this point, and I trust that the consultants will develop the rest of the package, including all of the discussion today. I think we could probably save FP&L a trip, as we recall from the smart meter dialogue, that there are many people that do not have smart meter technology or have refused it, so we would still have to have an independent reader just for those customers. I like the idea of including the option of Waste Management, as they do cover all the routes, but I don't know if that's a possibility. You mentioned earlier about the individuals who read the meters. Yesterday's heat index was 103, and we had 2 weeks of rather substantial rains. The customers got their reads and their bill. So yes, I want to reach out to them again and say thank you. The intelligent meters will eliminate their need to get out of the vehicle, and we will also, there's other discussions about our vehicle placement and movement in reading the meters on both sides of the streets in some jurisdictions. So I think that will eliminate some of the challenges as well. Your experience on the smarter meters or the electronic meters, their success rate, in other words, their lack of a failure rate, is substantially far better than what we have now. And I'm recalling back of some of the complaints that we get about, hey, there's something wrong with the meter. We spend a lot of time looking at meters, investigating. I know I go down to utilities, and everybody's always responsive and wanting to send somebody out there. And but we look at meters and then have to test them. There's gear reduction. There's wear and tear. We won't have that. We'll have either a read or a no read, and if there's a failure, we'll be able to provide for a read in the absence of that no read.
Yeah, exactly that.
Oh, you understood that.
To your point and to Commissioner Zorg's point is the QA/QC is not only are we going to need to have folks that go out there and randomly visually audit these meters to make sure they're working. The systems are, if you will, designed to send out, a self-test. So we'll know, through a 24-hour period if they're even working, if they're able to record that data, and if they're not, we'll be able to get a report that then lends for additional investigation.
So in real time, we'll have if a failure occurs on a Monday, we'll know by Monday night that we have a failure at that particular site.
We won't know a month from now. We'll know within a 24-hour period. Yes,
Right, as opposed to waiting for the second month complaint and then have to review and send out a technician and look at it and replace the meter at our cost, and it just keeps building up exponentially. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
I just have one on the smart metering. I think FP&L has some 55,000 meters, and I think they have 30 people that didn't sign up for the smart metering. So it's 99 point. Most people just didn't like it but took it. Sort of they didn't want to pay the extra fee. And then just doing a rough count on the postage. If in the future, however we look at doing any type of billing, if you just eliminated the postage on the billing, it's about $300,000 a year of postage cost. And that's a number that is a serious number that whether we change something today, I know the billing market sometimes has to be very unique and specific, like the property tax bill, they wouldn't put something like that in. But if there's any shift in the industry to do any type of group billing, because if everybody's paying that 300,000, Waste Management's paying it, the county's paying it, FP&L's paying it, that's just a lot of postage.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you. Vinnie, in your staff recommendation, you're asking to go with just a sole source, Langham Consulting?
Actually, Langham Consulting was selected, we went through the RFP process and brought it to the board. They were initially selected based on, I think it was 3 or 4 different vendors that applied for and went through that bid process. We initially engaged them for the first 3 services, and then today, our staff is looking for tasks 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just on those 2 tasks, the development of the request for proposal, 418 hours, I mean, that seems really excessive. You gave an example of a dozen projects currently underway. I can't imagine that there isn't some of these RFPs out there already done. 418 hours is 52 8-hour days. Now, I know they're also saying that they're going to help with the evaluation and scoring and proposals, but, that can't be more than a couple days, 8-hour days of work. So, for them to take 50 days to put together an RFP, to me, seems excessive. And then assisting in the contract negotiations, 164 hours. That's over 20 days. I can't see where we'd be negotiating a contract for 20 full 8-hour days. I mean, those numbers just seem real high to me. Now, is that a maximum not to exceed? Or are we going to expect it to come in a lot less than that? Or it just seems excessively high for the information that should already be out there readily available from these other jurisdictions.
We'll certainly take a look at that. One of the things that's involved with the formulation of a contract is we're not just buying a widget, we're buying a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment, and that entails, the MIU, the output device, that entails whether or not we do a 3G or if we go with a tower system, that entails looking at making sure that we have either backup power generator systems or stability, redundancy built in that system. So we have to be able to see what works for other folks, even though it has to be tailor-made for Indian River County. Certainly 418 hours does at the first swipe seem pretty high, but that talks about not only the hardware aspect of it, but certainly the software, the integration to make sure that where it goes to that server, when we collect all that data, does it integrate with our existing CIS billing system? And if so, are there things that we have to ask them? And are there output files that need to be created in order for the CIS billing system to read that file? So things like that in order to make sure that that's vetted. So that at the end of the day, when we get a submittal, either from like a Johnson Controls or Siemens that's an integrator, or if we get a contract from like a specific meter manufacturer that might subcontract the installation, we not only have the hardware taken care of, we have the software taken care of, and then we have the warranty issues that really have to come into play as far as making sure the meters are reading, making sure that there's warranty, making sure that there's a specific amount of time that if it's not working properly, we have either inventory, stock, or training for our folks to be able to go out there to replace that. So.
And I get all that. I'm just looking at North Miami Beach is 35,000 meters, very similar to our size. Sarasota, 80. Winter Park, 38,000. So it just seems to me a lot of this stuff might already be done. Contact North Miami Beach and say, hey, can we take a look at your contract? Did they cover all the issues you just brought up? And again,
we should be able to even piggyback on it as far as the way that the state.
Piggyback, or it shouldn't take 52 days to do this. I just think it's a little excessive.
Unless there's something.
The hours listed there are a maximum. I can't guesstimate for you at this time, if it would come under, to be honest, or not. As far as piggybacking, staff has spent a lot of time, Mr. Burke, myself, Lisa Patton, our customer service supervisor as well, looking at some of these other RFPs that were awarded. A large part of this component is the communication component, and propagation study is something you'll hear as a common term or see as a common term in these RFPs. Everybody's environment is quite different. So although the final product, that the meter and the transmitter going in the box may be something you end up with in common, the way you communicate that data is going to vary different be very different, whether it be in Miami or Sarasota or Lee County, Orlando, all these different places. We may end up using, the county's very fortunate. When we first started working with the consultant, one of the things they looked at is what we already had available in our community. That fiber network that Mr. Burke mentioned in his presentation, that's probably going to become a big value to us if we end up being able to utilize that. It looks like a big possibility that we would be able to utilize that. We've already had some discussions with Manny Cabo, our communications coordinator for the county, on that viability. We also have a lot of our own towers for our lift stations and the communications that we do from those sources, so we may be able to use some of that infrastructure. So that's where these products start to differ quite a bit. So it seems like, yeah, we could piggyback. When you look at how integrated of a system this is and all the components, it turns out it's going to be very difficult to piggyback. But those other folks that have gone in front of us are where we do see the competition coming in more and more, because the folks selling the meter data management, the data management portion of this, the communications portion, and the meter itself are the ones, you know, competing for our business and everyone else's business, and that's where you're starting to see that benefit. So, but to try to find I think it would be very difficult. I would love to think that, believe me, staff, that's some of the first things we look at. Is there anything out there we can piggyback? Because it saves a lot of us that are involved in putting RFPs together a lot of time if we can piggyback something. But I think in this product that's going to be a little difficult to do.
And agreed, but again, 52 days. I just wanted to ask, there's a blue wire inside the box, right?
Yep.
What does that blue wire do?
Well, there's a couple wires that are basically tied into the meter, and
Right.
it goes to an MIU or an antenna. It's an output device that then sends that data to either an antenna that's driving by or to that central network connection.
And they're in all boxes?
Yeah, that would be in all of the meter boxes in the right of way. Yeah.
And that's the wire that we would be using for our communications?
Well, it would be wirelessly transmitted from the meter box to a central location.
But somehow a
But
device
yes, there's a
will be
physical,
attached?
Yep, there's a physical connection from the meter itself that takes the, flow detection, gallons consumed, and then is able to output that remotely to a central location. So.
And there is one manufacturer that I know of, I don't know if there's multiples out there, there is one that's completely wireless.
Yeah, not being a telemetrist.
Just don't know what's going to be out there.
I don't know if that, yeah.
Ventriloquist or telemetrist?
Not being a telemetrist, yeah, somebody who studies telemetry. I don't know if 52 days is warranted for, I mean, we're talking about major infrastructure, the capital expense of whether it's tower, whether it's phone, whether it's a third party. And I realize it's very complicated, but that's a rather substantial amount of time to have to calculate that when most of the information is available as far as immediate or residential infrastructure is available with our records that exist, and GIS information, mapping, routing. A lot of that is going to be provided and readily available to you and to a consultant. I just believe that we're going well above and beyond with those amount of days. It does sound a little exorbitant. But again, this is a major decision that we will have to, once we're into the process, whatever that selection is broad scale throughout the county and will be here for years to come.
Yes, sir.
I think it's important to note how, we're looking at possibly a $12 million investment.
Long range.
There are a lot of complicated things to consider as far as, those other places may have different billing software systems and all kinds of different infrastructure in place because you got to go through that whole chain. I think since it is a not to exceed, we can push the vendor and really limit those hours and monitor that as we go forward. But it is a significant investment, and it's important that we get it right.
And quite frankly, gentlemen, I don't think any of us know enough about this subject to actually try to micromanage the utility department on this. I've got enough faith in the utility department to think that they will both simultaneously try to keep the costs down while trying to give us the product we need over the next 15-year period.
With that commitment, move staff recommendation.
We have a motion from Commissioner Flesher. I'll second it. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to comment on this? There being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Cindy and Mr. Burke. With that, we will move on to attorneys' matters. The first one is a Hummiston Park parking lot. Mr. Rangel.
Thank you very much. As we discussed at the board meeting on April 12, 2016, there's a parking lot on the west side of Ocean Drive that's located across the street from Hummiston Park in the city of Vero Beach. As you may recall, both the city and the county had adopted resolutions in 1944 declaring or dedicating this parcel for park purposes. On April 12th, the board directed the county attorney to draft a deed to grant this parking lot to the city of Vero Beach with two conditions. One was that the property remain zoned P2, and the second was that no building could be built over the parking lot. I presented this to the city. The city representatives were concerned about placing additional restrictions on the property. County Attorney's Office worked with city officials in crafting language that I felt reflected the goals of the board. Thus, before you today is a county deed which conveys the property to the city of Vero Beach with the restriction that it be used exclusively for public park purposes. And in the deed, we have preserved the right for the county to enforce that legal restriction. Thus, the County Attorney's Office recommends that the board approve both the resolution and the deed as presented, and I'm obviously available for questions.
Gentlemen, any questions for Mr. Rangel?
I do.
No surprise.
On this, the park purposes, and it gets into the question, if they kept it as a parking lot and somebody built 3 floors above it, would it still constitute benefiting the park?
Well, I guess the question is, what would be the 3 floors above it? If it was a 3-floor parking garage for the park, I think that would be exclusive
okay.
for.
Yeah.
And that's why we had in the language exclusively for. Thus, there's nothing else that it can be used for other than public purpose.
Well, that, even though I'd like it more clearly spelled out, I can go with that.
In the deed, it's fairly clearly spelled.
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to question the phrase, "The property shall be used exclusively for public park purposes." I know people do funny things with languages.
Right.
But that seems reasonably clear to me.
Move to approve.
We have a motion from Commissioner Davis, seconded by Commissioner O'Brien. Any other questions? Any comments from the dwindled public? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
We now have an update on legislative issues from Attorney Cotner. Good morning.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay now? Okay. Good morning. For the record, Kate Cotner, Assistant County Attorney. I just wanted to go over a couple of legislative issues that we're concerned about with the board, because we do have an opportunity. There's a Florida Association of Counties meeting at the end of the month, and it is an opportunity to talk to other counties and our peers about the issues that concern us, because it probably concerns them as well. So to start out, I just had 2 guiding principles, and that one has to do with home rule power. So we support maintaining the integrity of county home rule power, and the other one has to do with opposing any unfunded mandate. So that would really, I know they're both very, very broad, but it would give us the authority as issues come up and we can recognize something's going to be an unfunded mandate. We could say, well, of course, you know, that the county will assess that, but we are opposed to unfunded mandates. So it's something that most counties do use in their legislative program, and I just thought it would be wise to incorporate it into ours. Now, as far as the specific concerns, I was just going to go through the list, and most of these are just repeats of concerns from the past that we are anticipating are going to come up again. And so if you want to change anything or modify, add, just let me know as we go through. So the first is the Canaveral Port Authority Foreign Trade Zone. In the past, the county has supported an amendment to the Canaveral Port District Charter to remove the current language which restricts the foreign trade zone to Brevard County. So is this something that the board would like to continue supporting that action, or?
I would.
You would, okay.
Why don't we go through these? Why don't you go through them and just
Do the whole thing?
ask
Okay.
the ones we don't?
Okay. The second one is the transparency, accountability, and oversight of the Florida Municipal Power Agency.
Excellent.
Okay, the third is All Aboard Florida. In the past, we have opposed any state funding for All Aboard Florida and its passenger rail project. I added on supporting legislation that would regulate passenger rail project to protect the state of Florida's citizens, local governments, wildlife, waterways, and natural environment. And as we go through the summer, I think we'll get more specific on that issue. The fourth pertains to the Indian River Lagoon, supporting legislation which would appropriate funding for local projects which would protect the economic well-being of the lagoon. The fifth is beach renourishment, which just supporting the continuation of the statutory funding of beach renourishment projects throughout the entire state, but also ours locally. Six is county funding of court-related functions. As you know, first of all, supporting to remove the automatic 1.5 increase of funding of the county funding for court-related functions. The second would also be to increase the recording fee so that we have more money available for technology-related, court-related functions. Number 7 is the county share for the cost of Medicaid services. In the past, we have supported establishing a 3% cap on the growth for individual county Medicaid costs and opposing any effort to further shift the Medicaid cost burden onto local governments. Number 8 is solid waste management. I suggest that the county adopt language which would just oppose any legislation which would interfere with our ability to meet that requirement that's in section 403.7032, which has us doing 75% of our recycled or solid waste recycles 75% by the year 2020. There was some legislation last year. I don't know if it's going to come back, but just want to be prepared. Number 9 is medical examiners. Obviously, in the past, we have opposed legislation which would prohibit medical examiners from being able to charge a fee for cremation services. 10 is millage rates. In the past, we have opposed legislation which would negatively affect or change the formula that we use for millage rates. If you recall, last year, there was legislation that would have kept it that would have chosen, even though we chose to keep it artificially low, our millage rate, to help our community, we would have been, I guess, penalized for that. So we want to make sure if that language comes back that we're prepared. Number 11 is local government tax referenda. There was a piece of legislation last year that we opposed which would require a 60% threshold for a passage of local tax referenda during the general election. 12. It has to do with certificates of public convenience and necessity for life support and air ambulance. I had a suggestion here. I actually want to make it a little bit more broad because it's very, very narrow to the legislation that was proposed last year. My suggestion would be to oppose legislation relating to the certificates of public convenience and necessity, which would negatively impact the county's fire and rescue district and its ability to provide services. If you recall, our issue last year was that we were concerned it would interfere with their ability. You'd have a change in the people who were providing the services. So say an ambulance showed up, they stabilized the patient, but then you would hand the patient off to another ambulance that wasn't necessarily aware of the patient's condition and stabilizing them. 13 is firefighters. Last year, a bill was workshopped, and we anticipate that it will come back, and it creates a presumption that if you are a firefighter and you come down with one of 4 types of cancer, which is multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, testicular cancer, and prostate cancer, it is presumed that you have gotten that cancer from your line of work. Now, it's just the way that it's worded right now. It would negatively impact the county because of workers' compensation. It would really drive up our prices. And we just want the opportunity. We need to oppose it, and that's what I have suggested.
On that
yes.
one, I thought when we discussed that, you said that there's also an element in there where the other side would have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that it wasn't caused on the job.
Right, we would have to.
Yeah,
Yes, it's a
that's
clear
not the
and
other
convinced,
side.
yes, it's
Okay,
a competent evidence standard.
Well, that's important because it's not just a presumption.
It's a very high presumption.
It's a very high, I mean,
Yes.
essentially it's going to give us almost strict liability. I mean, the reality of it is it's not just that we have to make a decent case that it's not caused on the job. the reality is anybody who gets cancer is going to be billed to the taxpayers of Indian River County.
With these types of cancers, yes. Yes, the way that it's currently proposed.
Thank you.
Number 14 is tourist development tax. We did a resolution last year which we opposed legislation that mandates tourist development funds to be diverted away from local communities. And 15 has to do with derelict vessels. It basically would have the county supporting legislation that would streamline the process to remove derelict vessels from the waterways of the state of Florida, because right now it takes a long time to remove derelict vessels, and it really becomes it interferes with navigability for boaters. So.
Any questions of Kate?
I do.
A couple, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Commissioner O'Brien, then Commissioner Zork.
Thank you. Kate, number 11, the local government tax referenda, do you think that's coming back? I know they said it's 60% if you do a special or the primary election, but 50% for a general election, which is what we are doing with our sales tax. Do you see that coming back to change that, or?
I just don't know. I want to be prepared for it. I know that it was amended and we were satisfied with the amended language, but just in case they file the original language, I want to make sure we can hit the ground running.
Okay. And then the other question is for the board. If you all remember, I don't know, it's been 7, 8, 9 months or so back, we considered the issue of a ban on fracking in Indian River County, and we didn't approve that going with a ban. Instead, we wrote a letter to DEP requesting that they do their job and make sure that the environment is properly protected, and et cetera. Given the fact that DEP is now looking to revise their water quality standards and to increase the allowable amounts of certain carcinogens that will be in our drinking water, it kind of seems to me that given the top directive to DEP, that they are not really looking out for our best interests from an environmental point of view. And we had kind of put all of our eggs in that basket that DEP would be looking out for citizens, and I believe, given the direction DEP is going, particularly with the increase in benzene, which it's my understanding is a chemical that is a carcinogen and is heavily used in the fracking process, that this is a way to open up that fracking industry by relaxing those water quality standards. So I just ask if the board would be willing to reconsider this issue, given the fact that I don't think DEP is going to do a good job of protecting our environmental interests.
What do you
But
suggest?
I would like to bring it back. Take another bite of the apple.
Yeah,
You want to put it back as, you want to do it on one of our legislative priorities, or you want to do the resolution?
well, I would think both, but I was on the losing end of the vote, so I really can't properly feel I should make a motion on it, but I'm just asking the board if they would like to reconsider it, given the recent circumstances with DEP.
Well, there's no prohibition on making the motion, and I think you and I both, as I initiated, was the on the other end of the same end as the losing point. I think we just need to put it on the agenda.
I don't think legally we can't, but I would feel better if one of the three that were on the other side would make that step. Just,
I mean, if DEP is going in that direction, I'm sure you got it right. I'd like to know a little bit more about it, and have a little time just to figure out what the best particular way of fighting it is. I'll agree with you right off the bat that it's not the case that state agencies all the time do best for our safety. I mean, I'll use the example of the Florida Department of Environmental Transportation, which has been totally absent in the AAA controversy regarding safety. So I'm with you there.
Let's go ahead and take care of this in our legislative priorities, though.
Okay. Oh, I mean, in the legislative priorities, it ought to be something where, I don't know if any legislation is going to come down, and maybe that we should suggest some, that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection have clear, rigid standards that don't put the health, safety, and welfare of the Florida citizens at risk.
There was a bill on fracking last year that failed.
yes.
Okay.
And so,
And the result of that, there is no regulation of fracking now.
Right.
So there
It
is a
didn't
little
really
bit of
fail for
urgency
them.
there.
Yeah, and so that, for this to be one of our legislative priorities, I think would be totally appropriate. My problem is I don't know exactly the language and, as far
Well,
as.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, let me do this. Because I think I'm hearing a little bit more interest or support. So let me get some information and put together a package on what the DEP is doing with the new water quality standards. And then I'll bring that back as an agenda item and we can review the information and give you more time. And then I think we can update our list, Kate. I mean, this isn't set in stone, so.
No, these are just concerns. They're not even the priorities yet. I
Correct.
figured we
Right,
would do
okay.
that.
I would
in the
fully
summer.
expect that as fellow commissioners go to, say, a fact conference or anything else, that if they see some concerns or anything like that, that they add this to the list. As I see this, is the legal department wanted some guidance on the things that they could immediately go after or attack, rather than waiting perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, especially during the summer period, 3 or 4 weeks, to come back to get permission from us to do that. So I think what we're doing today is saying, well, certainly on these issues, if you see something on one side or the other, you can either oppose or support.
Yeah.
Okay, and for today, then maybe if we could just add fracking just as a
area of
category
Yeah.
to our list, and then I will bring something back in the future for, on the agenda where we have more
I think
data
that's
and details, okay?
a great path forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Davis.
On number 6, I like the first half of it, as far as removing the automatic increase. What I'm not sure about is about the increase the service fee for the recording of the documents, especially seeing how they're trying to send that back to court-related technology. I have no problem with that, but I don't know that, first of all, I'm not in favor of increasing the fee. Secondly, even if they do increase the fee, I don't know that I'd like our hands to be tied for it to go back to just technology.
And that's my fault for that one. So I'll tell you where we are. We have been in a funding challenge with the court administration and funding of those IT services. And the legislation currently says there's this money for court technology, but then it says the counties have to fund court technology. The request that we've got, not to give too much of a preview of this year's budget workshop, but what has been requested by the court administration, we can fund less than half of from that fee. So the difference, the only other funding source is the general fund. So it puts us in a box. I have issues with us paying for their court technology out of the general fund when there are so many more needs. So we had kind of agreed with them that they would support and we would support legislation, because they're saying that the $2 that they all split right now is insufficient. So that's, as an alternative, we get stuck holding the bag on the general fund for that shortfall, and we also get crossways with them over what level of funding we think is appropriate. So I anticipate a funding challenge with them on that specific issue, and this is something to kind of help address that. But I'll defer to the board on your policy decision on this.
I have no problem doing away with the 1.5% increase that was always there. I mean, I'm good with that. But as far as asking the legislature for an increase of fees, I've got to stop short of that today.
Okay.
I have one question on unfunded mandates. When a proposed bill or a change in the legislature makes it through its process, it goes through the committee that sees what the cost is for the state side. But they don't then say, okay, it's not going to cost the state anything, but then they don't quantify the cost to us.
They do.
Or do they?
Through the estimating conference, we do get numbers. It's usually, unfortunately, because of the last legislative session being early, we got
Right.
the numbers very late.
Okay.
So this year session will be on time, and we should have numbers around March, so that we'll know what the impact
Okay.
is to local governments.
So we'll have a better feel for it this year versus last year.
Yes.
Right, okay.
We have
Yeah.
as a guiding principle opposition to unfunded mandates, but I don't think the state has that same guiding
Yes.
principle.
So, just as a point of clarification, do you want me to remove for number 6? Do you want me to remove that second part? Was there
get
a
it. Let's
consensus?
Yeah, I'm only one of 5. I'm the only one right, but I'm one of 5.
Oh, well, since you're right, I'll go with you, Commissioner.
So that's a motion and a second to remove it.
The second supports under item 6.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Did we have a motion and a vote on the whole?
Oh, it's Laurie.
Did we have a vote on the whole package yet?
No, the only thing we had so far is the removal of the second portion of 6. I know we've discussed adding something about fracking. I guess the question to the board is, I see a lot in this is we oppose certain things, we support certain things. Fracking seems to be an issue that we're interested in. Is it that the board that the board may be supportive of at least regulation of fracking, or we would support?
I think right now, I just want it on there so Kate knows it's of interest to us.
Okay, so just a
And then
general.
when I bring it back, we will formalize our
Okay.
position.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like it kind of based around whatever it was last year. As far as, it's been my knowledge as far as laws, or they don't make it the first year. The second year, they have a tendency to either make it or get a lot further in the process. And so that way, we know what one side or the other is on, and that way it does help us take a position, in my opinion.
And my view on this is that this is not an issue that we know anything about. And we have a Department of Environmental Protection that ought to know something about. And I would like the state of Florida to actually put pressure on the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to do actually the job they're charged with doing, which I understand is to protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the state of Florida.
Yep. That's
the direction I'd like to go. So with that, I think we all understand where we are on this, so I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to approve this robust list of legislative priorities.
But we haven't made it priorities. That's the thing. It's too many things to be priorities. These are concerns that...
Legislative concerns.
Thank you. So we have a motion from Commissioner Flesher.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Davis. Any last discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Kate, thank you very much. It passes 5-0.
Thank you.
We now go on to Commissioner matters. There's one, email accessibility. Commissioner Zork.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was talking with some constituents that were looking at contacting the commission office on a number of different topics, and they said on our website the email contacts for all the staff members was not listed, and I know that we don't list them for a certain reason, but I'm wondering if there is a way we can bridge them or place them in an area at least so they're visible so they can type them in on their own, because I know the spamming and the other issues with companies like to just grab emails to bolster their junk mail broadcasting that they do, is some measure to add that piece of information with whether it's a kind of like a PDF page, you can see the email address, you can then type it in on your computer at home, or some type of link with a security code that keeps it from that spamming environment. I'm not that technically savvy on it. The other thing that came up as sort of a side item and looking at what some other areas in the state did that might be a good informational item, that on our commissioner page, people say, well, what committees do you serve on? Or who's your representative for this or that? A one-pager informational piece. The one that we copied for Orange County is more of a background bio. I'm not looking for that. It's more of, if they want to know, they have an issue with children's services, who's your representative on that? But primarily looking at, first, how can we get the email information available to the public in a secure manner that doesn't open us up to a unlimited spamming world? And then secondly, if there's a way to have some type of commissioner assignment or commissioner appointment type of informational page would be a part 2 to that. And
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Davis.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate our IT department. They're getting in the right direction as far as being mobile friendly with our, if you go to it on your cell phone. Mm-hmm. But if you look also at the third item down on that, which is the BCC agenda and minutes, mm-hmm. and then you go there, and then it graces the public with our mugs to look at there. But directly underneath that is the email addresses. Now, maybe that would be...
Oh, for us, but yes. I'm looking for the entire...
Okay, I agree with you, because then you go down to contact us at the very bottom of the mobile friendly, and it starts with Joe Baird. And in fact, it's interesting you bring this up. I tried to give some constituents some email addresses, and although I had an idea that it was their first initial, their last name at ircgov.com. Mm-hmm. But as you go into Smiths and maybe even Davis's for all, well, there is Davis's, for, several down there, that it's not, you'd like to be able to confirm it. And I believe the technology is in place for us to add that to the contact list there and do an encryption of some kind. I know that there's been places where I've entered my email address in to be a part of an email address and to ensure that it wasn't spam or that I was not trying to be a robo-generating email address. You've got to look at something on the screen there and type it in, and quite frankly, sometimes it's very difficult.
Right.
But that should be something that we kind of task the county administrator to have our technology people look into, and because clearly the days of a fax number, quite frankly, the day of a phone number, they're going further and further away from us on a daily basis, and I think email address would be totally appropriate to have it open to the public for.
I think staff gets the point on that one. I think that's fine as long as staff can come back with something which doesn't put the institution in harm's way in any way. We're fine. And on the other one, it seems pretty simple. I mean, we can just have a list of committees.
Right. Yeah.
And
On our website, we have on that board page, we've got the 2016 committee assignments for each commissioner. That just lists out Wesley S. Davis, District 1, the committees that he's on, Joseph E. Fleischer, District 2.
But why not have another page that's just a list of all the committees? Because if someone's going to Children's Services, he doesn't have to go to 5 commissioners or anything like that to find out who it is. You just have a list of all the committees, probably a list of all the chairmen and the contact information, and then a list of all the commissioner liaisons. I mean, it seems to be reasonably simple and clear for citizens to use.
The only other idea, looking at the sample Commissioner Zork put in here from Palm Beach County, where I have no problem in individual commissioners having our email. I think we need to be there, but instead of individual staff members, they have it broken down by the government service, engineering, garbage pickup, parks, purchasing, et cetera. And I'm a little hesitant to have every employee's email out there. I think it could be abused by someone. Someone comes in and is mad at his utility bill, and now all of a sudden he's going to be hammering that customer service clerk with emails all day long. I just don't know. I want to stick individual staff out to abuse like that, but there could be a utility email, and then it gets filtered through to the right channel.
There is a point to that, because I've come to work and open up some emails which has language in them that you really wouldn't want to subject all the employees to. So, I mean, I'd be happy to, again, let staff take a look at this. And
bring back
I mean, the understanding is, as I get it from Commissioner Zork, is that it ought to be as easy as possible for a customer or constituent to contact the right person. So, I mean, with that as the guiding principle, to ask staff to come back with the other concerns that we have, including yours, what is the best way to facilitate this or take this up at least to the next clear step?
And there's got to be something better than, if you have a utility issue, starting it out to whom it may concern. It's got to be something,
Billing question, service question, repair
something
question.
like that. And I don't know, I get what you're saying, but just a contact us and under contact us, just having it go to somebody that behind the Wizard of Oz
But
curtain.
as Commissioner O'Brien pointed out, there are different, and Commissioner Zork both, in the backup, there are different counties that have already done this. I think as part of the staff's research, they contact those
And
counties.
I appreciate the direction Commissioner Zork's going with this. I think it's a good idea, but I just want to make sure, we take the abuse. I mean, we're supposed to. I don't want staff to have to take the abuse.
And I agree 100% there.
And I think it can also, like on Palm Beach County, they've got water utility. I think if we do it at the departmental level, then it goes to one person, and they're also getting to the right person, because you may have various different utility issues, and if we try to avoid the, call this department, call that department, call that department, give them the runaround, if we can get them to a repository for each department that can get that to the right place in one stop, we think that's beneficial, and we'll bring something back on.
And it very well may be a situation just short of the department head. For example, I can imagine that in community development, Stan's assistant would be able to take care of that probably faster than Stan can and get her in the right direction. So maybe just maybe top 2 or so, I don't know how to say that properly, but you know what I'm going with.
Yeah, I think we know where you're heading, and we'll bring something back.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you,
And
Mr. Chairman.
Just back to the committee idea, I just did this as an example. So we've got our committee website, other boards, committees, and councils. I click on Planning and Zoning Commission, and it lists all the members, what district they're from, the chair, the vice chair, and the non-voting member from the school board. Obviously, it's different than EDC, for instance. I click on that. It gives me all the members and indicates that the non-voting commissioner liaison is Peter D. O'Brien. Is there anything different y'all want to see on that website or the indications as we look to try to better that process?
I think if staff just looks at what some other, take a sampling of 5 or 6 other places and say, look, here's something that really looks informative to the public and helpful, and just bring us back, some suggestions of the less clicks you have to go to get where you want to go, is what I'm looking for, is ease of use, simplicity, that type of information.
I'm with you on that.
Okay.
Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's find who's got a great wheel and copy it.
And if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you available Friday?